Chapter 10-11, Earthleaf King. At this very moment, Ruo Qingyuan's heart had already stopped. His already wounded body was withered, creating the impression that his skin was just clinging off his bones. His eyes were bulging from their sockets, as if he had witnessed something horrifying. His right fist was tightly clenched around a bottle of poison, but it seemed like he hadn't had a chance to use it before he was killed. Is that it? Gazing at the scene from above, Poison Master Bai seemed to have noticed something from examining the corpse, so he turned to Poison Master Hai to seek his opinion on the matter. Yes, it seems so. The latter nodded his head grimly. Exactly what I thought. Poison Master Bai narrowed his eyes, and with a tone that felt as sharp as a knife, dripping with bone-chilling killing intent, he spat, "The otherworldly demonic tribe." Upon hearing those words, Zhongxian frowned. You are saying that Hall Master Ruo Qingyuan was killed by the otherworldly demonic tribe. While the reputation of poison masters wasn't good, they hadn't sided with the otherworldly demonic tribe entirely back during the war, and they hadn't been in contact with them ever since. Otherwise, no matter how deep the poison hall had hidden, the Master Teacher Pavilion would surely have found and eradicated them completely. Considering that they hadn't been in contact, it was bizarre that an otherworldly demon would suddenly appear here and even kill a hall master. What was going on? Furthermore, hearing the other party's tone, it seemed as if they had already confirmed the matter. Poison Master Bai nodded as he explained, Hall Master Ruo's corpse is withered. This shows that his blood essence has been sapped dry. That is an ability that only the otherworldly demonic tribe possesses. His blood essence was sapped dry? Activating his eye of insight, he turned his gaze toward Hall Master Ruo's corpse once more to examine it, and his complexion turned incredibly awful. Just as the other party had said, the Hall Master's blood essence had indeed been devoured by something. It was extremely horrifying. Blood essence was the foundation of a human's vitality. For it to have been forcefully sapped dry, the excruciating pain that Hall Master Ruo had suffered in the process was unimaginable. This was an extremely vicious method of murdering another. This is the offensive means of the otherworldly demonic tribe. Zhongxian was astonished. While he had faced quite a number of otherworldly demons to date, more often than not, he had been able to kill his opponent before the other party had been able to make a move against him. As such, he didn't really have much of an understanding regarding the callous means utilized by the otherworldly demonic tribe. However, in the moment that he saw the corpse of Hall Master Ruo, he finally understood why the otherworldly demonic tribe was so deeply feared by all of the races, including the humans. To sap all of a person's blood essence was no different from eradicating one's existence. No proficiency in the way of medicine could bring back a man who had lost his blood essence. A thought flashed across Poison Master Bai's mind, and he exclaimed in astonishment, "The otherworldly demons must be here to snatch the booklet." For an otherworldly demon to have struck the moment Ruo Qingyuan entered the mausoleum of Hall Masters to retrieve the booklet, it couldn't possibly have been a coincidence. Hearing Poison Master Bai's analysis, Poison Master Hai nodded grimly in agreement as a sharp glint flashed across his eyes. Considering that we heard Ruo Qingyuan's voice not too long ago, it is apparent that it hasn't been long since he was killed. Most likely, the murderer should still be in the vicinity. If we give chase right now, we might still be able to catch up with that scoundrel. Right after saying those words, Poison Master Hai immediately scanned his surroundings with an intent gaze, seemingly trying to make out the location of the fleeing otherworldly demon. A moment later, he shook his head helplessly. The otherworldly demon might have fled hurriedly right after killing Hall Master Ruo in a single strike, but he had also made sure to erase his trail so that no one would be able to follow him easily. Considering how big the island was and how powerful the otherworldly demons seemed to be, it would be impossible for them to catch up with the other party if they were to get the direction wrong at first. Let me take a look. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes as he began scanning the surroundings. They had rushed over at top speed right after hearing the commotion, but typically speaking, there shouldn't have been time for the otherworldly demon to get too far away. As long as the otherworldly demon hadn't left the island yet, it would be possible to catch up with and subdue the other party with the strength that Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai possessed, allowing them to exact vengeance for Hall Master Ruo. Studying the depression carefully with the eye of insight, it didn't take long for a faint trail to appear in Zhongxian's sight. The otherworldly demon went that way. Zhongxian pointed. That way? Upon seeing the direction that Zhongxian was pointing at, Poison Master Bai and the others couldn't help but be perplexed. The direction pointed was the very direction they had come from. On their way to the mausoleum of Hall Masters, they hadn't seen anyone escaping. Furthermore, considering that they were in the base of the Poison Hall, shouldn't the assassin have been trying everything in his means to escape at this very moment? To be heading to the heart of their base at this very moment instead of fleeing, wasn't the other party courting death? It was not that they were unwilling to trust this Sun Chong person, but without the will of the founder, the other party was a mere nascent saint cultivator. It was indeed a little difficult to believe that he was capable of tracking down the trail of a Saint 4 Dan expert when even a Saint 5 Dan expert like Poison Master Hai was helpless before the matter. Follow me. The booklet could very well disappear forever should they allow the murderer to escape with it. Knowing that there was no time for an explanation, he hurriedly beckoned the others to follow him before flying in the direction of the trail. Seeing how affirmative the other party was, Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai decided to toss aside their doubts for the moment and hurriedly pursued Sun Qiong. Not too long after leaving the mausoleum of Hall Masters, Zhongxian suddenly came to a halt. He scanned his surroundings carefully, and a deep frown emerged on his forehead. The otherworldly demon was extremely cunning. There had still been a trail a moment ago, but it had abruptly disappeared at this point. Even through his eye of insight, there was no sign of the other party anywhere. However, this sufficed to show that the otherworldly demon didn't have any time to get away yet and could very well be hiding in the area. Where is he? The surroundings were mainly flat. There were a couple of low-lying buildings and miscellaneous plants scattered around the area, but from the sky, it was possible to catch a bird's-eye view of everything easily. If the other party was truly in the area, there was nowhere he could hide himself. Unless... Zhongxian lowered his head as his eyes narrowed. Since the other party was neither in the sky nor on the ground, that only left a single possibility: the other party was underground. However, there was not a hole to be found on the ground. There didn't seem to be any way they could get into the ground to pursue the other party. Noticing Zhongxian directing a doubtful gaze on the ground, Poison Master Bai walked up to him and asked, "What? Are you suspecting that the otherworldly demon is hiding underground?" Zhongxian nodded. "The trail ends right here. Other than underground, I cannot think of anywhere else. This isn't a difficult problem to resolve. To know whether the other party is underground or not, we just have to check it a little," Poison Master Bai replied. In the next moment, a brilliant glow emanated from his Yuanshan acupoint as a figure that shared the same facial features as Poison Master Bai slipped out from it. Separation of the primordial spirit from the physical body. With a light movement, Poison Master Bai's primordial spirit slipped into the ground and disappeared from sight. Primordial spirits were similar to souls in many ways. Unlike physical bodies, they were capable of warping their form freely, allowing them to pass through most impediments easily. As tough as the ground was, there were still small pores in between that allowed a primordial spirit to slip in easily. Hong Long. Not too long after Poison Master Bai's primordial spirit descended into the ground, the crowd suddenly felt the earth beneath their feet shaking violently. Following which, a figure abruptly burst out with a resounding explosion. "Where do you think you are escaping to?" As soon as that figure appeared, Poison Master Hai responded swiftly and charged up with a deafening bellow. Gathering immense strength in his hands, he formed a massive palm, which tore down the buildings and trees in the surroundings before it could even strike the ground. At this moment, Poison Master Hai was already a Saint 5 Dan expert. Even the most casual of actions from him wielded the strength to move mountains and split oceans, making it hard for anyone to stand against him. Who? Upon seeing the devastating attack launched by Poison Master Hai, the figure knew that he would surely die if he were to be struck by the attack. Thus, he curled himself into a bundle in the sky and descended like a streak of lightning back to the ground. The speed he was moving at was even faster than when he had leaped out from the ground earlier. Hula. Falling toward the ground at such unbelievable speed, everyone thought that the figure would surely incur severe injuries upon impact. Yet, contrary to all expectations, the figure disappeared into the ground as if a water droplet falling into a pile of sand, disappearing within the soil in the blink of an eye. This is the art of earth traversing. Poison Master Hai exclaimed in shock. His strike had created a huge hole in the ground, but the enemy was nowhere to be seen. Alarmed, his eyes narrowed warily. Art of earth traversing? Zhong Xian asked doubtfully, having never heard of the name before. It is an ability that runs through a unique bloodline that grants one's body the ability to travel freely underground just like a primordial spirit, never hindered by anything in one's path. After swiftly explaining the matter to Zhong Xian, Poison Master Hall bellowed loudly, "Bai Ting, you chase him beneath. I will wait above and strike him as soon as he surfaces. No matter what, we can't allow that fellow to escape." "All right." Beneath the ground, Poison Master Bai's voice sounded. Moving in the form of his primordial spirit, he could travel freely through the pores of the earth. With two Saint 5 Dan experts collaborating with one another, one working on the surface and the other one beneath the ground, it would be impossible for the enemy to escape even if he possessed the ability to traverse through earth freely. Boom, boom, boom. A series of intense tremors struck the area, and various buildings in the area fell easily as if they were simply piles of hay. Examining the situation from the sky, Zhong Xian and the others couldn't help but feel as if there were two mighty dragons clashing with one another beneath the ground, creating huge shockwaves through the ground with each blow they traded. Huge cracks emerged on the surface, and they swiftly crept along the surface, covering more and more ground. A turbid gush of smoke burst forth from a couple of these cracks, and the temperature in the area rose. Soon, the smoke dissipated to reveal flurrying lava within the cracks. Poison Master Bai had barely made the breakthrough to Saint 5 Dan just a moment ago, so he was still unable to control his strength perfectly. It was one thing to battle in the sky, but to clash beneath the ground. This was indubitably bringing a catastrophe upon the Poison Hall. If the battle between Zhong Xian's physical body and Hall Master Ruo had resulted in the loss of precious historical architecture of the Poison Hall, the battle between Poison Master Bai and the otherworldly demon would be no different from bringing utter ruination upon the Poison Hall. The trembling earth felt as if a massive beast had come to life, reducing innumerable exquisitely designed buildings to rubble. Su. After a long period of time, a figure finally darted out of the earth once more. This time, his movement wasn't as nimble as before. As soon as he appeared, he spurted a mouthful of blood, and he crashed heavily to the ground. Poison Master Hai, who had been waiting patiently outside for the prey to be driven over to his side, swiftly spread open his fingers and grabbed forward. Numerous surges of Zhunqi crossed with one another to form a firm cage around the figure, sealing the other party's movements. As expected, it really is an otherworldly demon. At this point, Zhong Xian finally got a clear look at the other party's appearance, and a deep frown surfaced on his forehead. The other party bore some semblance to the Golden Leaf King and the other otherworldly demon kings he had killed before. On top of that, the other party emanated a sharp aura, which clearly revealed his Saint 4 Dan cultivation. The Violet Leaf King discreetly sent a telepathic message to Zhong Xian discreetly from the myriad anthive nest. "Young master, that person is the Earth Leaf King. He is also one of the 10 great kings of our Qingtian lineage. His fighting prowess might be beneath mine, but he possesses the ability of earth traversing, allowing him to easily escape from any crises. He is our most capable scout." The Violet Leaf King was a Saint 4 Dan expert, so as long as Zhong Xian permitted him to, the other party could easily extend his spiritual perception beyond the myriad ant hive nest to detect what was happening in the area. Zhong Xian couldn't help but ask, "Earthleaf King? Another one of the 10 great kings? Why would he be here?" He seemed to be meeting the 10 great kings of the Qingtian lineage everywhere he went. So far, he had already encountered half of them, and he had successfully killed or forced them to submit to him thus far. Honestly speaking, had Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai not made a breakthrough to Saint 5 Dan, there was no way they would have been able to capture the other party, considering the other party's ability to travel freely underground. After a moment of contemplation, the Violet Leaf King revealed his deduction. "My guess is that the Qingtian Emperor didn't feel secure entrusting the vital mission of acquiring the map to me and the Waterleaf King, so just to be safe, he secretly sent the Earthleaf King over to carry out the mission should the both of us fail. Most likely, the fellow must have followed you and Elder Shu here. The otherworldly demonic tribe was unaware of the location of the poison hall, or else he and the Waterleaf King wouldn't have resorted to ordering the city lord to search for the sepulchre flower all around the city to lure an elder of the poison hall to them. Thus, for the Earthleaf King to suddenly appear in the poison hall, chances were that he had been trailing them all along. Zhongxian shook his head. That's not necessarily so. I think that it is more likely that he might have gotten into the poison hall by following Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai. Knowing that the otherworldly demons were after the map as well, Zhongxian had made sure to proceed very carefully when he left Jinyuan City. If there had been someone following him, he would have surely noticed it. On the other hand, Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai probably didn't think that there would be anyone following them, thus creating an opening for the Earthleaf King to exploit. Had it been anyone else, the powerful formation of the poison hall would have surely kept them at bay. However, considering that it was the Earthleaf King who was skilled in the art of earth traversing they were talking about, the other party just might have been able to burrow his way through the formation with relative ease. After making his way into the poison hall, the Earthleaf King had been camping underground, not daring to make a reckless move in fear of the retaliation of the poison hall. It was only when he heard that Hall Master Ruo was going to acquire the booklet alone that he secretly followed the other party, striking the moment that the other party took out the booklet. Based on what he had planned earlier, he had thought that he would surely be able to get away easily with his ability to traverse through Earth. Yet, who could have thought that Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai would suddenly make breakthroughs overnight, thus granting them the strength to corner him, rendering him incapable of escaping. Chapter 10-12, Hu Yunsheng's horror. It might sound complicated, but it wasn't too difficult to deduce the series of events after learning of the other party's identity. While Zhongxian was in the midst of conversing with the Violet Leaf King, Poison Master Bai's primordial spirit returned to his body before walking up to the Earthleaf King. With a tap of his finger, a unique poison seeped into the other party's body. After which, with a wintry face that was devoid of the slightest warmth, he bellowed, "Who sent you here? This is bad." Seeing Poison Master Bai forcefully interrogating the Earthleaf King, Zhongxian's face immediately warped in horror, and he hurriedly rushed forward to stop the other party. However, it was already too late. The trapped Earthleaf King forcefully clamped his jaws together, and his face immediately turned extremely red. "Ha ha ha, you have fallen for our ploy." Right after saying those words, the Earthleaf King's head fell powerlessly to the side. Fresh blood spurted from his every orifice as his breathing came to a halt. Just like the Golden Leaf King and the Green Leaf King, the Earthleaf King also had a pill that contained lethal poison in his mouth. So that they wouldn't find themselves in a position where they had no choice but to spill the secrets of the otherworldly demonic tribe, they would bite down on the pill and commit suicide were they to be captured. Right after learning of the assailant's identity, Zhongxian had busied himself trying to deduce how the other party had managed to sneak into the poison hall, hoping to make sense of the story. However, he didn't think that Bai Ting would use poison against the other party while his attention was away, and that became the final push that forced the Earthleaf King to commit suicide. By the time he realized, it was already too late to intervene. The poison was extremely potent, and it brought about near immediate death to the otherworldly demons. Even with Zhongxian's 7-star proficiency in the way of medicine, there was no way he could bring the already deceased Earthleaf King back to life. He said that we have fallen for his ploy. Poison Master Bai scoffed coldly, thinking nothing of the other party's words. It mattered not to him whether the other party had died here or not as long as the booklet he needed to procure for his mission was still around. Walking up, he took the other party's storage ring and searched its interior, but soon, his complexion became incredibly awful. Noticing Poison Master Bai's expression, Poison Master Hai asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" "The booklet isn't in here." Poison Master exclaimed anxiously. "It isn't in there." Poison Master Hai was astonished. It was just a moment ago that the otherworldly demon had killed Hall Master Ruo and stolen the map, and the both of them had swiftly collaborated with one another to capture him shortly after. Given the short span of time between both events, there shouldn't have been any chance for the booklet to have left the other party's possession. Damn it, we have really fallen for their ploy. This fellow's goal was to lure us away. Clenching his teeth tightly together, regret could be seen in the depths of Poison Master Bai's eyes. Poison Master Hai and the others weren't fools either. They immediately realized what was going on after hearing those words. It seemed like the one in charge of stealing the booklet was someone else. This fellow was probably intending on giving himself away from the very start, even if Zhongxian hadn't found his trail so as to draw all attention to him, thus creating an opportunity for his companion to escape. It had been 10 minutes since the incident occurred, and if it was exactly as Poison Master Bai thought, the Earthleaf King's companion should have already gotten away from the Poison Hall by now. Once he entered the surrounding sea, it would be impossible to track him down anymore. Naturally, it didn't take long for Zhongxian to come to the same conclusion as well. Just as his complexion turned awful, the Violet Leaf King suddenly exclaimed with a trembling voice, "The culprit is probably the Skyleaf King." Skyleaf King? Yes, he is the strongest of the 10 great kings of the Qingtian lineage, as well as the one who boasts of the most brilliant mind of us all. His cultivation has reached Saint 5 Dan, leaving Aperture Realm primary stage. He is the only one of us all who possesses the ability to enter and flee discreetly from the Poison Hall, the Violet Leaf King explained. Leaving Aperture Realm primary stage? Zhongxian's face turned livid. If that truly was the case, there was a really good chance that their deduction was true. An expert of the leaving Aperture Realm could easily hide his physical body outside the island and sneak in with only his primordial spirit. Right after obtaining the map, the other party could swiftly flee without anyone noticing. Furthermore, in the form of a primordial spirit, the other party could move at an incredible speed, such that even a Saint 4 Dan aerial Saint Beast would find it hard to catch up. Not expecting for there to be such an expert among the 10 great kings of the Qingtian lineage, Zhongxian hadn't thought of the possibility that his eye of insight might currently be too weak to uncover the enemy's trail. This had resulted in an opening for the enemy to exploit. It seemed he would have to be more careful in the future. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian asked, "Who else is among the 10 great kings, and how powerful are they?" Even though he had already taken down half of the 10 great kings, he still didn't have a concrete idea of who or how powerful they were so far. It sure was stifling for him to still know next to nothing about the opponents he was facing. Of course, if the Qingtian Emperor were to learn of Zhongxian's current thoughts, he might just very well spurt a mouthful of blood on the spot. Of his 10 most capable subordinates, 4 of them had been killed through a scheme of some kind and 1 had ended up submitting to the enemy. And yet, the culprit behind all of it actually knew nothing about them at all. If the culprit could already do this much despite knowing nothing about them, just what kind of calamity would befall them once the other party knew everything about them? The Golden Leaf, Green Leaf, Water Leaf, and Earth Leaf are already dead. Other than me, the Sky Leaf, Jade Leaf, Wind Leaf, Stone Leaf, and Fire Leaf are still remaining. Of them, the Sky Leaf King is the strongest of us all, and he is the head of the 10 great kings as well. The Jade Leaf King holds the title of being the second strongest of us all, possessing a cultivation of half-leaving Aperture Realm. Following on are the Wind Leaf King, Stone Leaf King, and Fire Leaf King. Each of them wields incredible might that is far beyond the rest of us. As such, they are known as the Upper 5 Kings, whereas the rest of us are known as the Lower 5 Kings. Without any hesitation, the Violet Leaf King spilled everything he knew about the 10 great kings. After hearing the news, Zhongxian nodded in realization. Just dealing with the Lower 5 Kings had already exposed him to grave danger on multiple occasions, but who could have thought that there would still be an Upper 5 Kings above them? From the looks of it, they were determined to obtain the item in the ancient domain. Considering that they had even successfully obtained the map, there was a good chance that the humans would be placed in grave danger once the ancient domain opened once more. Forget it, I will just have to deal with whatever comes my way. There was no way Zhongxian could have predicted such a twist in the situation. At this point, there was nothing he could do anymore. The Skyleaf King had more than sufficient time to make his escape, making it nigh impossible for them to locate the other party. Taking a step back, even if they were able to find the Skyleaf King by some stroke of luck, there was no way that Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai, who had just made a breakthrough and hadn't had the opportunity to reinforce their cultivation yet, could be a match for the other party. Less had to be said about Zhongxian himself. With the Violet Leaf King and the otherworldly demon puppets, he might still be able to subdue a Saint 4 Dan expert. But against a Saint 5 Dan expert, The wisest decision he could possibly make in such a situation was to flee as far as he could. Leaving Aperture Realm experts were capable of fighting with their primordial spirits, which made them very difficult opponents. Not only were primordial spirits capable of flitting through space at incredible speeds, they also wielded immense strength that made it impossible for normal cultivators to match them. Without reaching Saint 5 Dan himself, it was impossible for any cultivator to face an expert of that caliber. Master teachers prided themselves on their ability to match opponents stronger than them due to their discerning eyes, but the leaving Aperture Realm was too huge of a rift to bridge. The differences between a physical body and a primordial spirit were reminiscent of that between a mortal and a deity, a gap that could never be bridged. Take Zhongxian's current situation for example. Despite having yet to reach Saint Realm, he was able to defeat Saint 2 Dan spiritual perception realm experts, cultivators of 2 whole cultivation realms higher than him. The capability to rival opponents stronger than himself wasn't too uncommon for those beneath Saint 5 Dan, albeit it was often not as exaggerated as in Zhongxian's case. However, even if a genius of such caliber were to reach primordial spirit realm pinnacle, it was unlikely that he would be able to match an ordinary leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivator. Not to mention, a leaving Aperture Realm expert could flee with their primordial spirit even if they were no match for their opponent. Those whose cultivation had yet to reach Saint 5 Dan had no way of catching up at all. Putting everything aside, just the ability to travel through the ground, those who hadn't reached leaving Aperture Realm, with the exception of those who possessed unique bloodlines like the Earthleaf King, were incapable of doing such a thing. On top of that, primordial spirits need not breathe. This meant that they could enter places with harsh conditions without fear, such as venturing into the depths of the ocean, a feat that those bound by their bodies would never be able to achieve. While Zhongxian was conversing with the Violet Leaf King, Poison Master Bai turned a grim look toward him and said, "The otherworldly demonic tribe has stolen the booklet and killed Hall Master Ruo on top of that. This matter must be reported to the headquarters immediately. Poison Master Sun, the both of us will be taking our leave first." Clearly, they also knew that it was unlikely that they would be able to find the other party. It would only be a waste of time if they continued searching the area. Thus, they felt that it would be much better for them to send the founder, who was in a dangerous position at the moment, back to the headquarters first. "All right." Zhongxian nodded. The Hall Master of the Hongyuan Empire Poison Hall had been killed. Such a huge organization couldn't go without a head for too long. Thus, the crowd unanimously voted Vice Hall Master Shu as the new Hall Master. Zhongxian handed the sepulchre flower over to Vice Hall Master Shu and offered him guidance on the concoction of grade 7 poisons so that the latter could make a breakthrough to become a 7-star poison master. After all was done, he heaved a sigh of relief. With his aim at the poison hall accomplished, there was no longer any need for him to remain in the area. Thus, he stood up and bade everyone farewell before leaving with Poison Master Bai and Poison Master Hai. The aerial saint beast that Poison Master Bai traveled on was extremely swift. In less than a day, Zhongxian had already returned to Jingyuan City. After alighting from the saint beast, Zhongxian made the 2 poison masters promise him once more that they would put everything they had into protecting Wei Ruyan before he was willing to let them leave. Students would eventually leave their teachers. Wei Ruyan was no exception to the rule. Even the most ferocious of eagles would never be able to mature if it were to live under the protection of another its entire life, deprived of the opportunity to fly independently in the azure sky. It was the same for students. This was precisely the reason Zhongxian had allowed his students to leave him one after another despite his reluctance. First Zhao Ya and Lu Chong, followed by Yuan Dao, and now, it was Wei Ruyan's turn. Zheng Yang would also likely head to the Combat Master Hall eventually, which meant that 5 out of his 7 direct disciples had already left him. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian made his way back into Inkcloud Quarter once more. It didn't take him long before he met Hu Yunxing, and the latter informed him that the Master Teacher Pavilion and Hongyuan royal family had already dispatched some men the previous day to seal the City Lord Manor for investigation purposes. It turned out that the City Lord's only son was held hostage by the otherworldly demons, leaving the City Lord no choice but to obey their commands. Nevertheless, it was unpardonable for a human to serve an otherworldly demon to deal with his own kind regardless of the reason. As such, The guards had apprehended the city lord, and they were currently in the midst of transporting him back to the capital, where he would be judged by Yu Shenqing personally. Upon hearing this news, Zhongxian couldn't help but sigh again. A human really shouldn't commit evil, no matter how small a sin it was. Often, it was a single wrong step that eventually led to an endless downward spiral into the abyss. After settling the heaven's path Zhenqi lying dormant in Hu Yunsheng's body, Zhongxian stood up and bade farewell. Upon finding a rural area, he summoned the Byzantium Alios beast from the anthive nest, and adept leaped onto its back. With a light stomp of his feet, the Byzantium Alios beast soared into the sky, making its way straight toward the Master Teacher Academy. Was Byzantium Alios beast. A Saint Realm Byzantium Alios beast. Watching as Zhongxian depart from the distance, Hu Yunsheng's body abruptly froze. In that moment, a multitude of information flashed through his mind, nearly exploding it. Having never seen his boss acting with such indecorum before, Zhu Xiao asked doubtfully, "Boss, what's wrong?" While Byzantium Alios beasts were indeed rarely seen in the world, there were still a couple of them in Hongyuan Empire. Noticing Zhu Xiao's doubts, Hu Yunsheng replied with a bitter smile, "It's true that a Byzantium Alios beast is an extremely rare tamed beast, but there is only one Saint Realm Byzantium Alios beast in the whole of Hongyuan Empire." "Only one?" Zhu Xiao was taken aback. "Boss, could it be that you have already deduced Elder Sun's real identity? If my guess isn't wrong, the current form he is assuming is a disguise. His real name is Zhongxian," Hu Yunsheng replied. "Zhongxian?" Zhu Xiao's body stiffened as his face turned completely pale. "You are talking about the newly appointed principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, Principal Zhong?" As an intelligence agency, Inkcloud Quarter had a lot of information regarding Zhongxian. Even Zhu Xiao had heard of the legends of that Principal Zhong and viewed the latter as a role model whom he would strive towards. "Yuan, that's him." Hu Yunsheng nodded. "I just recalled that Principal Zhong has a butler called Sun Qiong. Furthermore, for the Master Teacher Pavilion and the royal family to come so swiftly to deal with the city lord. According to internal news, it seems like the order to do so has come directly from Principal Zhong. Putting together all of this, I would really have to be a fool to still not figure out the other party's identity. At this point, Zhu Xiao finally realized as well. It truly felt like a dream. To think that Principal Zhong would personally come to Jingyuan City and even visit their Inkcloud Quarter. "Wait a moment, boss. If I recall correctly, you attempted to kill the other party to steal his wealth back then." Recalling that matter, Zhu Xiao hurriedly turned his gaze toward Hu Yunsheng, only to see the latter's face turning completely pale as veins popped out by his temples. "If you dare speak of this matter to another soul, I will definitely hunt you down and kill you." Thinking about the matter again, Hu Yunsheng couldn't help but feel fearful. Who would have thought that he would actually end up trying to rob the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy? Wasn't this no different from courting death? It was fortunate that the other party was a master teacher, a reasonable person. Otherwise, he might very well have become a corpse already. Chapter 1013, Luo Ruoxin's request. A brilliant sun hung brightly above, and a warm breeze caressed the world. After flying for roughly 10 days on the Byzantium Alios beast, the massive outline of Hongyuan City gradually came into view. Within the 10 days, Zhongxian had managed to internalize all of the knowledge he had learned from the Poison Hall and fused it with his current fighting style. At the same time, he had also cultivated the Saint Ascension Decipher to its very peak, just a step away from breaking through to the Saint Realm. However, it was a pity that the 7-colored Earth Jade Essence was nowhere to be found at the moment, or else he would have long made a breakthrough. "I should get Sun Qiong to look into the matter." In terms of logistical efficiency and intelligence gathering, he was nowhere on par with Sun Qiong. Thus, it was reassuring to leave it in the hands of the latter. As long as he could find the 7-colored Earth Jade Essence, he would be able to push for a perfect breakthrough to Saint Realm, thus inducing a huge leap in his fighting prowess once more. By then, regardless of the dangers that lurked in the ancient domain, he would surely be able to deal with them easily. Not too long later, right after the Byzantium Alios beast landed in his manor, Sun Qiong rushed up to Zhongxian and reported, "Young master, young Master Zheng Yang has been taken away. Taken away? By whom? Zhong Xian asked with a frown. It's Combat Master Liao from the Combat Master Hall. He says that he will take young Master Zheng Yang to participate in the progeny of combat selection, or else this matter might end up being pushed a year back, Sun Qiong replied. Progeny of combat selection? Zhong Xian was taken aback. Yes. This is the letter that young Master Zheng Yang left for you. After saying those words, Sun Qiong passed a letter over. With a complicated look on his face, Zhong Xian opened the envelope and saw a note filled with words within. It didn't take long for him read through the entire note, and at the end of which, he couldn't help but sigh deeply. Combat Master Liao had reported the matter concerning Zheng Yang to the headquarters, and the headquarters had instructed him to bring Zheng Yang to them at any cost to participate in the progeny of combat selection. If Zheng Yang cleared the selection, he could very well inherit the heritage of the combat god and become the next head of the Combat Master Hall. The founder of the Combat Master Hall had been a direct disciple of Kongsha, and out of respect for the overwhelming strength he possessed, those of the Master-Teacher continent had given him a nickname, Combat God. As long as one cleared the progeny of combat selection, one would be qualified to inherit his heritage and become one of the strongest experts of the Master-Teacher Pavilion or even the entire Master-Teacher continent. It looks like he has found his own path. To have sent 2 of his students away within just a short period of 10 days, Zhong Xian couldn't help but feel a little lonely within. Nevertheless, he still felt gladdened for them. After all, they couldn't possibly remain his students for their entire lives. They would eventually have to find their paths to tread on. If Zheng Yang could become the combat god of this generation, the head of the Combat Master Hall, at the very least, this would mean that his teachings hadn't been in vain. As Zheng Yang's teacher, Zhong Xian would be more than delighted to see that. Forget it. After I am done dealing with the matters concerning the ancient domain, I should bring the members of the Shenxian faction to Qingyuan Conferred Empire's Combat Master Hall for the both to interact and learn from one another. I should be able to receive updates about Zheng Yang there. With a smile, Zhong Xian tossed aside the loneliness he felt within. He had already promised Combat Master Liao and the others that he would take the members of the Shenxian faction for a visit to the Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall once they settled the affairs regarding the ancient domain at Fire Source City. While the Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall was only a branch, it was still possible to gather some news regarding Zheng Yang from there. Is there anything else other than that? Young Master, the head of the Formation Master School and Blacksmith School, took 10,000 students from their respective schools each to Fire Source City for a mission. They set forth roughly 5 days ago, Sun Qiong reported. Fire Source City? Mission? Zhong Xian frowned. It wasn't anything much for the other school heads to head to Fire Source City in advance, but, due to the great implications tied in with the ancient domain, there was a need to keep the matter confidential. To mobilize 20,000 students from the Master Teacher Academy there despite so, could it be that there had been some kind of compelling situation in Fire Source City that warranted aid? Due the grave importance of the matter, even Sun Qiong wasn't qualified to learn more about the matter. In fact, it was likely that even the students who had set forth to Fire Source City were unaware of what they were going to do either. Is there anything else? Zhong Xian continued asking. Also, Luo Ruoxin has visited here twice in your absence. It seems like she has an important matter to ask of you, Sun Qiong reported with a peculiar look on his face. Having followed the young master from the start of their journey at Tianqian Kingdom, they had encountered plenty of beautiful ladies, each possessing their own unique charm. Yet, not once had the young master granted them any preferential treatment or behaved differently around them, except for this Luo Shi. Speaking of which, there was also something bizarre about Luo Shi as well. No cultivator was uninterested in his young master's teachings, but this Luo Shi was really the first. The way she acted around the young master showed that she only regarded the latter as another ordinary cultivator. This in itself was truly perplexing. She came over to find me. Zhong Xian was taken aback. Luo Ruoxin was the only woman who had ever touched his heart, be it in his previous life or his current one. There had been many problems cropping up one after another, and he had been busy trying to deal with them, resulting in the both of them not meeting one another for a considerable period of time, but his heart still couldn't help but thump in anticipation upon hearing her name. This was completely different from how he felt around Euphea and the others. Yes. As she is young master's good friend, I dared not probe further into it. Sun Qiong nodded. It's fine. I will pay her a visit to ask her about it later on, Zhongxian replied with a smile. After confirming that there was nothing else to tend to, Zhongxian got up and made his way right toward the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. Not too long later, he landed at Luo Ruoxin's residence. Standing before the entrance of Luo Ruoxin's residence, he quickly tidied his clothes. After which, he took out a mirror and saw a handsome face staring back at him. Nodding in satisfaction, he knocked on the door. Luosha, I am Zhongxian, Zhongxian said, transmitting his voice into the residence through his zhengqi. The pleasant voice of a female replied, Come in. Walking into the residence, Zhongxian saw Luo Ruoxin standing not too far away. Just like always, her presence felt calm and serene, reminiscent of a still painting. Surprisingly, there was another man standing not too far away from her, Mu Yuan. After agreeing to meet at Firesaw City back then, Mu Shi had left together with Wu Shi to return to Qingyuan Conferred Empire. Zhongxian didn't think that he would meet the other party here. Upon seeing Zhongxian, Mu Shi exclaimed anxiously, Senior uncle, you came at the perfect time. Help me talk some sense into Luosha, she is insisting on following us to Firesaw City as well. You wish to go to Firesaw City as well? Taken aback, Zhongxian turned his gaze toward the young lady before him. Yuan Luo Ruoxin nodded with a slight smile on her lips. With all of the mysteries surrounding the ancient domain, as a master teacher, I should also go and check it out as well. But we know next to nothing about the ancient domain. Even Wu Shi won't be able to guarantee your safety, Mu Shi said worriedly. Back then, the old principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy had ventured into the ancient domain together with a team he had assembled, only to disappear from the face of the world. On top of that, the Qingyuan Master Teacher Pavilion had no records about the interior of the ancient domain at all, so there was no saying what dangers were lurking in the depths of the ancient domain, not to mention they had recently received news that the otherworldly demonic tribe was involved with the ancient domain as well. It could be said that this expedition into the ancient domain would likely result in great casualties. Given Luosha's noble standing, there was no way he could take responsibility should anything happen to the other party. While speaking, Mu Shi was blinking frantically at Zhongxian, attempting to signal to the latter that he wanted help persuading Luosha against it. With such obvious gesturing, he thought that his senior uncle would surely receive his signal. Yet. That's great, let's head there together then. Zhongxian's eyes gleamed in excitement. It just so happened that he had been searching for an opportunity to spend some time with Luosha when such a news came his way. It was as if even the heavens were on his side. Senior uncle. Mu Shi's vision darkened, and he nearly fell to the ground. To say such words after I have gestured so clearly for you to help me persuade her against it, don't you think that you are a little too shameless? Even if you like Luosha, at least be a little more reserved about it. To make it so obvious for everyone to see, don't you think that it is unbefitting of your standing as the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy? It's fine. How can a master teacher grow if they attempt to avoid every single danger that comes their way? Zhongxian waved his hands leisurely. Besides, I will be around to protect her, so there is no way anything bad can happen. Dark lines streaked across Mu Shi's face. You are the very reason that I am feeling very unsettled about this expedition. Look at all of those ridiculous things you have done in the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. It is as if trouble chases you wherever you go. If only I knew that you were so unreliable, I would have never asked for your help. Just as Mu Shi was about to argue back, Luo Ruoxin waved her hands and said, Zhongsha is right. Mu Shi, there's no need to persuade me anymore, my mind is set. All right then. Seeing that there was no way he could convince the young lady before him otherwise, Mu Shi shook his head helplessly. Seeing that Mu Shi had given up on the matter, Luo Ruoxin turned to Zhongxian and said, Since you are back, let's set forth as soon as possible. Zhongxian nodded in agreement. All right, let's set forth now. There wasn't anything major in the Master Teacher Academy at the moment, and even if there was, School Head Mo and the others were more than capable of dealing with it themselves. Besides, there were only around 8 days to the date on which they had agreed to meet at Firesource City. If they didn't set forth soon, it was likely that they would be unable to make it in time. As Zhong Xian often journeyed around, his necessities were neatly packed in his storage ring at all times, so there was no need for him to make any preparations. Mu Shi swiftly called for his aerial spirit beast, and before long, the trio was on their way toward Firesource City. Sitting in the wooden hut atop the Saint Beast's back, Zhong Xian turned to Mu Shi and asked, "I heard that Zhao Bingshu and the others have brought quite a number of our students over to Firesource City. Did something happen?" Sun Qiong might not have been qualified to learn about the details of the matter, but as one of the leaders of the expedition team, Mu Shi definitely knew something about it. "Something did happen," Mu Shi said grimly. "Not too long ago, the seal leading to the ancient domain suddenly grew unstable, and it seems like it could collapse at any moment. As such, school head Zhao led the students over in the hope that they could stabilize the formation and buy some time until the seal finally opens once more." How did such a matter occur? Zhong Xian was bewildered. When the ancient domain appeared 2 years ago, the Master Teacher Pavilion did send some men to investigate it, and there hadn't been a problem then. Why would the seal be destabilized all of a sudden? I am not too sure about the details either, but my guess is that the otherworldly demons are involved in this matter. With a deep frown on his forehead, Mu Shi hesitated for a moment before continuing. According to reports from the local master teachers, there have been otherworldly demons sighted in the vicinity of the seal. Eyewitnesses claimed that they were carrying some kind of artifact with them, and they loitered around the area for a brief moment before hurriedly leaving. Shortly after they left, the seal suddenly destabilized. Artifact. Could it be a booklet? Zhong Xian frowned. The booklet that the Skyleaf King had stolen from the Poison Hall was said to have come from the ancient domain within the seal. 4 otherworldly demons to appear around the seal and destabilize it at this moment. Could both matters possibly be related to one another? The more Zhong Xian thought about it, the more convinced he was of the matter. As a Saint 5 Dan expert, the Skyleaf King was capable of flying at speeds far greater than he could. While it had taken Zhong Xian roughly 10 days to travel from Jingyuan City to Hongyuan City, it was likely that the Skyleaf King wouldn't even require 5 days to travel from the Poison Hall to Firesource City. Furthermore, in his communications with the Violet Leaf King, he had learned that the otherworldly demonic tribe possessed exceptional spatial means. Just take the altar that Zhong Xian had found from the Green Leaf King and Golden Leaf King for example. It was capable of transporting and receiving items remotely. Booklet? Not expecting to hear such a question, Mu Shi was stunned for a moment before replying with a light chuckle. That is impossible. How can a booklet possibly wield the power to destabilize the seal? In his view, books were only meant to store and impart knowledge. An artifact that could destabilize a powerful seal, which even they were helpless before, was bound to be an incredibly powerful one. So how could it possibly be a mere booklet? Seeing that the other party didn't believe him, Zhong Xian shook his head and fell silent. At this point, that was only a hypothesis on his part. It would still require confirming after they arrived at Firesource City. Recalling the order received from the headquarters not too long ago, Mu Shi said, "Oh, right. Senior Uncle, Wu Shi won't be taking charge of the expedition into the ancient domain. Instead, the Master Teacher Pavilion has appointed a 7-star Pinnacle Formation Master, Han Shu, as the expedition leader. The Master Teacher Pavilion has ordered for everyone involved in the expedition to follow his commands after entering the ancient domain, and no one is to move around recklessly so as to avoid undue trouble." Chapter 1014. Firesource City. The expedition to the ancient domain had implications that could very well affect the entire human race, so the Qingyuan Master Teacher Pavilion took the matter very seriously. Not only did they dispatch Wu Shi, they had also engaged the help of 7-star Pinnacle Formation Master Han Shu to aid the team in breaking the seal and leading them through the ancient domain. Mu Shi knew that even though his senior uncle was a very capable man, the other party was also a very gutsy and decisive person, never hesitating to do whatever that he thought was right. Fearing that some unneeded trouble might arise due to his senior uncle's obstinate personality, he felt that he should warn the other party in advance. "Don't worry." Zhong Xian nodded reassuringly. Seeing the confident smile on Zhongxian's face, Musha wasn't too sure how he should respond. He subconsciously shot a glance at Luo Ruoxin and saw a slight smile of helplessness on the latter's face, seemingly untrusting of Zhongxian's words as well. But thinking about it, it was no wonder Luo Ruoxin felt that way. Back then, when she brought Zhongxian to the Saint Ascension platform, she had warned him to remain respectful. But in the end, he had still collapsed the other party's cliff face, and if not for Kongsha speaking up in that crucial moment, he might very well have been pummeled to death on the spot. Sometimes, that fellow possessed astounding talent and wits, such that one couldn't help but be impressed with him. At other times, he behaved so doltishly that it was nearly adorable. The trio began chatting casually. In the midst of their conversation, Zhongxian asked a few more questions about the ancient domain, and upon learning that it likely had ties with Kongsha, he couldn't help but feel a surge of agitation. Back at the Saint Ascension platform, Zhongxian had asked Kongsha personally about the innate fetal poison and confirmed that the latter had suffered from the same affliction back then as well. If this ancient domain had ties with Kongsha, perhaps he might be able to uncover something more about the innate fetal poison. Amidst the conversation of the trio, the aerial saint beast traversed swiftly through the sky. 5 days later, Fire Source City finally came into sight. Looking at the city, which emanated a reddish hue beneath the radiant rays of the sun, Musha said, due to the geographical location of Fire Source City, its weather is exceptionally hot. To make things worse, it is currently summer here as well. It would probably be unbearable for anyone who isn't a cultivator to live here. It is indeed really hot here. Feeling the incredible heat in the surroundings, Zhongxian nodded in agreement. The place he had visited just a few days ago, Jingyuan City, was completely filled with snow, battering passers-by with its bone-chilling frost. Even though the Saint Ascension platform isn't too far away from here, there sure is a vast difference in the temperature, Zhongxian remarked. The Saint Ascension platform, which he had visited with Luo Ruoxin back then, wasn't located too far away from Firesource City, just a few hundred kilometers away. Yet, the weather there was perfectly normal, devoid of the blistering heat here. The Saint Ascension platform is where Kongsha became a celestial saint. It is a place blessed by the heavens, so naturally, the weather there is mild. On the other hand, Firesource City has quite a few active volcanoes around it, so it is inevitably plagued by such a hot weather, Musha explained. Zhongxian nodded. He had a map of Hongyuan Empire in the Library of Heaven's Path, so he was very familiar with the geography of the area. To be named Fire Source, the source of flames. It wasn't any surprise that the city would be plagued with unbearable heat. Luo Ruoxin couldn't help but ask, given the unbearable heat plaguing the area, why was a city constructed here? Why do so many people still continue to live in the area? A place filled with many active volcanoes that could erupt at any moment, as well as the sweltering weather, why would people still live in the area? Before Musha could speak, Zhongxian chuckled softly and replied, as hot as the local weather is, it happens to be a suitable climate for growing plants that thrive in a torrid climate. Take the witherleaf grass for example, it is known for the withered look of its leaves throughout its growth, and it is able to mature even without water. A single stalk of witherleaf grass can easily fetch the price of a high-tier spirit stone in the market. It's so expensive. Luo Ruoxin was taken aback. A single high-tier spirit stone was more than sufficient for a normal person to live in luxury for their entire life. For a single stalk of a medicinal herb to be worth such a price, it was no wonder so many people were willing to endure the unbearable weather and live here. Zhongxian had not finished his explanation. Not only so, there are also quite a few rare spirit beasts and saint beasts living in the area. They can fetch a high price when sold. Besides that, there are also several deposits of valuable ores in the area. Having read all of the books in the Master Teacher Academy, he boasted an even greater understanding of Hongyuan Empire than most master teachers who had grown up here. I see. Luo Ruoxin nodded in realization. There was bound to be a reason for a community to gather and a huge city to be constructed in the area. Hearing the other party's introduction, Musha nodded in approval. Senior Uncle Shaw is knowledgeable. While his senior uncle might be unreliable at times, the vast knowledge he possessed was truly praiseworthy. Be it information regarding culture, geography, or occupations, Everything seemed to come to him at a single thought, leaving others with nothing but admiration for him. It was due to this that the school heads had elected him to become the leader of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, which boasted a heritage of 10,000 years. It's nothing much. Zhong Xian smiled. There is still some time before the seal opens, so why don't we meet up with the others at the local Master Teacher Pavilion first? While the trio had been speaking, the Saint Beast had arrived in the airspace above the city. It gradually descended, and before long, it landed right before a towering building. The Master Teacher Pavilion. This city was significantly larger than Jingyuan City, and its population density was also greater than the latter. As such, the Master Teacher Pavilion had constructed a branch in the area. However, it was significantly weaker than the Master Teacher Pavilion in Hongyuan City, and the Pavilion Master only possessed a cultivation of Saint Wanden intermediate stage. Shortly after walking in, a middle-aged man walked over to welcome them. Paying respect to Mu Shi, Yuan. Where are Formation Master Han Shu, Wu Shu, and the others? Bring us to them, Mu Shi replied with a smile. Wu Shu and the others have already left for the swallow-embracing mountain. They departed 2 days ago, the middle-aged man hurriedly replied. They have already left for the swallow-embracing mountain? Mu Shi was taken aback. Shouldn't there be a few more days before the seal opens? Why did they head over so early? I am not too sure. They only instructed me to remain here to urge the arriving master teachers to head toward the swallow-embracing mountain as fast as possible, the middle-aged man replied. Understood. Mu Shi nodded before turning his gaze toward Zhong Xian and Luo Ruoxin. If even Wu Shi and Formation Master Han Shu have made their way over, it is very likely that the situation with the seal might have worsened. Let's quickly head over to take a look and see how we can help them. Yuan Zhongxian and Luo Ruoxin nodded before getting atop the aerial Saint Beast once more. The seal to the ancient domain is not located within the city but in the depths of the swallow-embracing mountain, which is around 300 kilometers away, on top of a massive active volcano. Due to the searing temperature, barely anyone goes there. Seated within the room on the back of the aerial Saint Beast, Mu Shi filled the duo in on the situation regarding the seal. Similar to the island on which the poison hall was located, the seal to the ancient domain was also constructed on top of an active volcano. The massive formation that made up the seal was driven by the ravaging energy contained within the volcano. If those who didn't have a comprehensive grasp of the formation were to attempt to break open the seal forcefully, there was a high chance that the entire mountain might collapse instead, causing the entrance to the ancient domain to disappear for good. As such, not even the experts from the Master Teacher Pavilion dared to tamper with it. Until the seal opened of its own accord, they could only wait patiently. It didn't take too long for Zhongxian and the others to cover the 300-kilometer journey to the seal. In less than 10 minutes, a towering mountain peak, several thousand meters high, appeared majestically before their eyes. However, the entire mountain seemed to be absent of life. All they could really see on it were crimson stones. Even before coming close to the mountain, they could feel a searing sensation licking their skin. Flicking his wrist, Mu Shi took out 2 pills and passed them over. This is the heat cleansing pill. Swallowing it will grant you some immunity against fire poison 1, sparing you from harm. While it wouldn't be too difficult for them to withstand such searing heat given their current cultivation, if they were to stay in such conditions for an extended period of time, the fire poison would still assault their bodies, causing them great suffering. In order to prevent such a situation from occurring, half a month ago, the newly appointed school head Jew of the apothecary school had tasked his students with mass-producing heat-cleansing pills for the expedition members. The production method for the heat-cleansing pill wasn't too complicated. Most 4-star apothecaries were able to forge it. Its ingredients were mainly cooling in nature, thus granting it exceptional effectiveness in relieving heat-related afflictions. Thank you. Possessing the Heaven's Pathshenchi, Zhongxian didn't even fear lethal poison, so naturally, heat poison couldn't possibly faze him in the least. Nevertheless, this was a token of goodwill from the other party, so he couldn't bring himself to reject it. Taking the pill, he opened his mouth and swallowed it. As soon as the pill slid down his throat, a cooling sensation permeated his entire body, leaving him feeling as if he was standing before a refreshing spring breeze. The heat around him seemed to have vanished altogether. This isn't an ordinary heat-cleansing pill? Zhongxian's eyes widened in astonishment. While it seemed no different from a typical heat-cleansing pill on the surface, the effectiveness of it was clearly far greater than an average pill. I forged it personally out of the various medicinal herbs I picked a while ago, Mu Shi replied with a smile. No wonder. Zhongxian nodded. Mu Shi was a 7-star master teacher, and apothecary was one of his supporting occupations. It was only natural that a grade 4 pill forged by a 7-star apothecary would have outstanding effectiveness. The aerial saint beast advanced swiftly, and not too long later, the group arrived at the peak of the swallow-embracing mountain. Gazing downwards, they saw a humongous hemispherical depression beneath them. Countless students were seated cross-legged along its perimeter, infusing zhenqi relentlessly toward a specific location. Their bodies were completely drenched in sweat, but that didn't prevent more from trickling down their faces. They are trying to stabilize the seal, Mu Shi remarked grimly. From the looks of it, the situation with the seal was far more precarious than they had thought. Otherwise, they wouldn't have mobilized so many people simultaneously to stabilize it. Zhongxian nodded. Those are the 10,000 students from the Formation Master School. The students of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy were dressed in a unique robe, so it wasn't too difficult to recognize them. Hoo. Just as the students stabilizing the seal were about to reach their limits, another group of students suddenly rushed forward and swiftly placed formation flags that they had just smithed a moment ago on specific locations. These new flags couldn't alter the structure of the seal in any way, but it could stabilize it temporarily. They were the students from the blacksmith school. The students from both schools worked together with excellent teamwork, their movements both swift and fluid. It was apparent that they had repeated this set of movements multiple times over the past few days. However, despite the combined efforts of the 20,000 students, a powerful energy still continued to rage within the hemispherical depression below, seemingly ready to explode at any moment. Frowning, Zhongxian activated his Eye of Insight and took a look. After examining it for a moment, Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. What a complicated formation this is. His comprehension of formations was on par with most 7-star formation masters, and yet, he still found it rather difficult to comprehend the entire structure of the formation. The sheer complexity of the formation was enough to leave him slightly lightheaded. No, it doesn't really look like it. The more Zhongxian looked at it, the more perplexed he felt. The structure he was looking at seemed like a formation, but there was something rather different about it at the same time. Even though the seal was unstable, it was still dormant, not yet activated. As such, Zhongxian couldn't use the Library of Heaven's Path to assess the situation concerning the formation. With his current understanding of formations, even with the Eye of Insight, it would likely take at least several months for him to make sense of it. If it was truly a formation, there was no doubt that it was beyond grade 7. A formation that was beyond grade 7. No wonder no master teacher from the Qingyuan conferred Empire Master Teacher Pavilion dared tamper with it. It was already far beyond their scope of understanding. Hoo. While Zhongxian was busy assessing the depression, Mu Shi carefully controlled his aerial spirit beast to land gently on the ground. After landing safely, before the trio could walk up to the hemispherical depression, Wu Shi walked over and said, Zhongshe, Luoshe, and Mu Shi, you are here. Chapter 10:15. I can give it a try. Wu Shi. The three of them clasped their fists to greet the other party. What is the current situation here? Zhongxian got straight to the point. Half a month ago, the seal suddenly became unstable. Even so, with the forces that we have, we were still able to stabilize it easily. But 2 days ago, the seal suddenly began shaking intensely, threatening to collapse at any moment. Despite devoting all of our men to stabilizing the seal, we are barely hanging on at the moment. At this rate, it won't be long before the situation exceeds our control. Wu Shi glanced at the hemispherical depression with a worried frown. Exceeds our control? Indeed. Wu Shi nodded. Just as he was about to explain the matter, a deep rumbling reminiscent of thunder suddenly reverberated from the ground below. Like the cry of a behemoth or the roar of a massive dragon prowling beneath the mountain range, It seemed like a fearsome being would suddenly come to life and massacre everyone present. What is that? The faces of Zhongxian and the others warped in astonishment. That deep rumbling sounded like the source of a devastating calamity of some kind. Before such overwhelming force, the strength of humans felt pitifully insignificant in comparison. It felt like no amount of effort would stop the destruction from crashing down on them, devouring them all. We've looked into the matter, and it seems like that sound originates from the other side of the seal. There is no way for us to find out for sure what is going on within at the moment, but at this rate, it won't be long before the entire seal collapses. Once that happens, be it the ancient domain or fire source city, they will be reduced to ashes, Wu Shi said worriedly. If the seal was destroyed, it could very well result in the rampaging energies within the volcano running amok, thus inducing a massive explosion. The swallow-embracing mountain was only 300 kilometers away from Fire Source City. At such a short distance away, there was no doubt that Fire Source City would be devastated by the massive explosion as well, killing even Saint Realm experts that stood in its path. Far too much energy had gathered beneath the volcano over the years, to the point where no human could withstand it. Hong long long. While they were speaking, the rumbling grew louder and louder. The ground began shaking violently, and a scorching burst of air gushed up from the depths of the seal. In an instant, over half of the formation flags that had just been planted a moment ago were jolted out of the ground. The students of the Formation Master School, who were sitting before the hemispherical depression to stabilize the seal, instantly looked weakened, and a few hundred of them were abruptly sent flying from the spot. Huge mouthfuls of blood spewed from their mouths. A new group of students hurried forward to fill the gaps left behind by the casualties. Exerting the full extent of their cultivation, they tried their best to stabilize the seal, preventing it from collapsing. What an incredible force! Upon seeing this sight, Zhongxian's face paled. The might gushing out from beneath was far beyond his expectations. Even the collaboration of multiple Saint 5 Dan experts might not be able to suppress it. Even with so many students of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy infusing their power into it, they were still barely holding on. Before such immense power, putting aside entering the ancient domain, he would be reduced to dust by the powerful force before he could even get close to the seal. Before, he had been thinking that no matter how dangerous the ancient domain was, as long as he were to rely on his eye of insight and library of heaven's path to assess the situation ahead of him, he would be able to avert danger with relative ease. But from the looks of it now, his thoughts had been too naive. Even the dangers lurking outside the ancient domain were far greater than he had expected. The slightest mistake could easily result in death. At this moment, a loud bellow was heard throughout the area. Team A, guard the general. Team B, guard the Zun. Team C, guard the Qian. 1. As for the other teams, remain where you are and continue infusing your zhenqi into the seal. Following that, an elder flew into the sky and stood above everyone else. A massive compass floated before him, which he used to make calculations as he continued issuing orders here and there. Hearing his instructions, the students beneath hurriedly moved in the teams they had formed before and carried out the instructions demanded of them. Following which, innumerable surges of zhenqi poured forth, converging at the very center of the depression. In that moment, it looked as if someone had set off a massive firework. Under the influx of zhenqi, the fortified seal slowly calmed down. At the same time, the rumbling beneath the ground also gradually quietened down, as if being forcefully suppressed. After studying the situation for a moment longer, Zhongxian suddenly noticed something, and a deep frown arched between his brows. Wait a moment. If the seal is fortified in such a manner, how can it be opened later? This method of reinforcing the formation was indeed effective in coping with the assault of the fearsome force from below, bringing safety back to the area. However, there was a major problem with this solution. The fortification of the seal meant that it would become harder for them to open the seal and enter the ancient domain. In fact, if this continued, it might become entirely impossible to do so. According to their previous estimates, the seal was likely to open within 2 to 3 days. However, if they were to continue reinforcing the seal in such a manner, putting aside 3 days, the seal might not even open within the next 3 years. Indeed, but there's nothing we can do about this situation. If we leave the seal be, the volcano will explode without a shred of doubt. Not only will the ancient domain be destroyed, the entire area, including Firesource City, will be devastated as well. If they had a choice, they obviously wouldn't fortify the seal. But if they didn't do so, the ancient domain would be completely destroyed, making it impossible for them to enter. Besides, considering how volatile the immense energies that had accumulated beneath the volcano were, who would dare enter even if it was possible to do so? After all, there was no one who could guarantee that the volcano wouldn't act up while they were within. Once that happened, they could very well be torn to shreds by that overwhelming force. Is there really no alternative solution other than to fortify the formation? Zhong Xian frowned. There is, but it simply isn't feasible. Wu Shi shook his head. Zhong Xian turned his gaze to Wu Shi and said, "Tell me about it." The situation was already as bad as it could get. At this point, they had to try everything that they could. The seal is similar to a cover that suppresses the violent energies raging beneath the volcano. Using a metaphor, the current situation is similar to that of a balloon. Initially, when the energies attempting to burst out from beneath weren't too great, the seal was still able to keep them in through its elasticity, Wu Shi explained. However, as more and more energies accumulated, the seal rapidly found itself coming to its limit, putting it under threat of exploding altogether. Through reinforcing the seal, we are effectively bringing the breaking point of the seal higher, allowing the seal to withstand the rampaging energies by a greater degree. However, no matter how much we fortify the seal, as long as the energies beneath the ground continue to accumulate, the seal will eventually reach its limit. In a sense, we are only pushing back the inevitable. Unless we resolve the root of the problem, the accumulation of energies below, there will come a day when the seal exceeds its breaking point and burst. Hearing the other party's explanation, Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. The metaphor the other party used was a fitting description of the current situation they were in. The root of the problem was still the accumulation of energies beneath the ground. The fortification of the formation only served to rein the rampaging energies in for the time being. It wasn't a long-term measure. In fact, the longer the energies were suppressed, the greater the accumulation of energies, resulting in the eventual explosion being more devastating than it already was. To make an analogy, it was similar to constructing a dam to prevent a flood. The more water it kept at bay, the higher the water level would be, and the greater the pressure the dam would be put under. When the dam eventually collapsed, the flood would come crashing down with far greater momentum than it originally would. If something similar were to happen here as well, it would spell a great calamity. The other solution we have thought of is to dispel the energies accumulated below directly. It would solve the root of the problem, but, before the seal is opened, there is no way we can venture below to identify the cause of the accumulation of energies and resolve the issue. On the other hand, the moment the seal is opened, the accumulated energies will surely burst forth, resulting in a catastrophic explosion. Wu Shi shook his head with a bitter smile. This was a paradox. To dispel the energies, they would have to break open the seal and enter the other side. But the moment this was done, an explosion would burst forth, annihilating everything in the area. This. Zhong Xian and Mu Shi glanced at one another and shook their heads helplessly. Wu Shi was right. This was indeed an irresolvable problem. Despite knowing the dangers of fortifying the seal continuously, they had no choice but to do it. At this point, Zhong Xian suddenly thought of something and asked, "I heard from a master teacher stationed in the master teacher pavilion that just before this problem occurred, otherworldly demons were spotted to be lurking around the vicinity. Is this true?" "That's right." Wu Shi nodded. The otherworldly demons didn't remain in the area for long before fleeing. We have no idea what they did in the short period of time that they were here, but the seal suddenly grew unstable. It was still rather manageable at the start, and we were able to easily suppress it with just a couple of us in the area. However, as time ticked by, the instability worsened, and eventually, as you can see, even with the combined might of 20,000 students, we are barely holding on. They didn't remain in the area for long before fleeing. Zhong Xian repeated Wu Shi's words contemplatively and fell into a moment of thought. A moment later, he asked, "Who was the one who spotted the otherworldly demons?" "It was an ordinary 4-star master teacher." He was stationed as a sentry in the area when it happened, Wuxia replied. An ordinary 4-star master teacher would only possess a cultivation of transcendent mortal 4 dan, and yet, he noticed the movements of the otherworldly demons? Zhongxian remarked with a tinge of bewilderment in his tone. He had encountered many otherworldly demons who had passed through the seal for the ancient domain, and even the weakest of them was a Saint 1 dan. How could an ordinary 4-star master teacher, a transcendent mortal 4 dan cultivator, notice them but still remain alive at this point? Given the vast disparity in cultivation, it was inconceivable to think that the otherworldly demons hadn't noticed the presence of the 4-star master teacher. Don't worry, that master teacher is definitely trustworthy. There is no way he could have betrayed mankind, Wuxia hurriedly added. I am not suspecting that 4-star master teacher of colluding with the otherworldly demonic tribe. Zhongxian shook his head. Halfway through his words, the ground suddenly began to rumble once more. Initially, the energies would only act up once every 4 to 6 hours. However, the intervals between each surge has been decreasing swiftly, and at this point, it is less than 10 minutes, Wuxia said. 2 days ago, due to the lower frequency of the rampaging energies acting up, their forces were still able to handle it with relative ease. However, with an assault coming once every 10 minutes, everyone was already on the brink of collapse. My students won't be able to hold on for too long at this rate, Zhongxian said with a livid face. 20,000 of his students were currently standing atop the swallow-embracing mountain, and a significant proportion of them were from the Shenzhen faction as well. An assault once every few hours was still within their means, but one that occurred every 10 minutes. They would be pushing themselves to the limit. At this rate, they might very well end up pushing themselves too far and incur permanent damage to their foundations, resulting in a steep decline in their cultivation. I know, but there is no better solution at the moment. Wuxia sighed in frustration. At this point, Luo Ruoxin suddenly spoke up. Since it is just a matter of time before the energies burst forth, why don't you just create an opening to guide the rampaging energies out instead? This way, you should be able to resolve the root of the problem as well. Create an opening? It is not that we haven't considered such a solution before, but given the overwhelming energies that have accumulated at the moment, if we create an opening at the wrong location, it could end up becoming a trigger for an explosion instead. The seal would be torn apart, and in the worst-case scenario, we could all die, Wuxia said. Using the same balloon analogy, a balloon that expanded continuously would burst eventually. To prevent such a situation from happening, one could poke an opening in it to release the accumulated air gradually. However, this was easier said than done. If one were to create an opening at the wrong location, it could very well become a trigger that would cause the balloon to explode instantaneously. All of the master teachers that were currently standing atop the swallow-embracing mountain would be reduced to ashes. As such, how many openings to create and where the openings should be made were very important questions to consider. A mistake made in either of the two could spell their demise. Even with 7-star master teachers and 7-star formation masters among them, they weren't confident enough to take such a risky action. So, we just have to find the most suitable locations to release the built-up energies. Hearing the conversation between the two, Zhongxian's eyes suddenly lit up. With a look of excitement, he said, regarding that matter, perhaps I can give it a try. Chapter 10:16 Zhongxian breaks the seal. 1. As long as he could activate the formation, he would be able to find the flaws in it through the library of Heaven's Path. That would be even more accurate than any compass that one could find. It was nigh impossible for others to find the precise location of where the openings should be made, how big the openings should be, and how much strength one should exert in opening it. However, that happened to be the easiest thing in the world for Zhongxian. Give it a try. Wuxia shook his head. I know that Principal Zhong possesses extraordinary talent in the field of formations, but the implications are simply too great. Failure is not an option for us, so you mustn't act recklessly. Failure would spell the instantaneous explosion of the volcano, and that would reduce all of them to ash. This was no laughing matter, and it was definitely not something that one should give a try. I know. Nodding in agreement, Zhongxian was just about to explain himself when a voice from the sky harumphed coldly. Give it a try. Humph, Can you bear the responsibility if something goes wrong? For a person as young as you to speak such big words, what is the world becoming? Hong Long. An elder bellowed coldly as he descended from the sky, heading toward the group. He was the 7-star Pinnacle Formation Master who had been busy taking control of the situation to fortify the formation, Han Shu. His face looked withered from the fatigue he had accumulated over recent days, but at this moment, not even his exhaustion could conceal the sharp coldness and displeasure he was directing toward Zhongxian. Guild Leader Han. Allow me to introduce you. Wu Shi hurriedly stepped forward to resolve the air of awkwardness drifting between them. This is the newly appointed principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, Zhongxian. This young lady over here is Luo Shi. As for Mu Shi over here, I don't think that I will have to introduce him since you are old friends with him. Principal Zhong and Luo Shi, this is the head of our Qingyuan Empire Formation Master Guild, Han Shu. You are Zhongxian? Hearing the introduction, Han Shu turned to Zhongxian and said, I have heard of you. To be able to become a 6-star formation master at such a young age, you are indeed an outstanding talent. However, as a master teacher, you must speak with prudence. Recklessness is the most common cause of the downfall of young talents. Everyone here knows that releasing the built-up energies within is a far better solution than forcefully stopping it, but do you know what the consequences of failure are? Not only will we die, everything within a radius of 1,000 kilometers from here will be eradicated. Countless lives will vanish in an instant. Are you certain that you can shoulder such responsibility? Knowing that the other party was only berating him because the other party thought that he was taking such a grave matter lightly, Zhongxian quickly explained himself with a smile. Guild Leader Han, you have misunderstood what I am saying. When I said that I would give it a try, I meant that I will do so only after I am entirely confident of success. Naturally, I dare not fool around with so many lives at stake. How arrogant. Yet another middle-aged man walked over with a disdainful look on his face. This seal before us may very well be a grade 8 formation or even higher than that. My teacher and I have analyzed it for more than 2 days now, but we are still unable to find a foolproof way to release the energies within the seal without triggering an explosion. Yet, without even taking a look at the formation, you are saying that you are confident of success. As the principal of a Master Teacher Academy, don't you think that you are being a little too arrogant here? The middle-aged man harnessed immense strength within him, such that even his very presence could exert great pressure on those looking at him. Saint 3 Dan, Embryonic Soul Realm. The embryonic soul realm was also known as the origin soul realm. In this cultivation realm, one's origin core would metamorphose into the form of a human, pushing one a step further toward the primordial spirit realm. Cultivators at the embryonic soul realm possessed incredibly powerful souls, allowing them to subdue cultivators far weaker than them with just the pressure exerted through their presence itself. Cough cough. Zhongshi, this gentleman over here is Guild Leader Han's student, 7-star formation Master Liu Mo. Not expecting the casual words from Zhongshi to cause such a fallout, Wu Shi awkwardly attempted to remedy the situation. For the past 2 days, Guild Leader Han and his student had put in a lot of effort to find a suitable node where they could release the energies. For this, they hadn't rested for even a single moment, but they were still unable to find a node that they were entirely confident was safe to open. They were already cranky from the frustrating situation before them, but a fellow actually came by at such a moment and arrogantly said that he would give it a try, as if it was something that could be resolved very easily. In that instant, the frustration that had accumulated in them over the past 2 days was ignited into blazing rage. Liu Mo. Zhongxian shook his head. Never heard of you before. He had never been to Qingyuan Empire before, so naturally, he knew nothing about the guild leader or formation masters in the Formation Master Guild there. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have pointed it out in view of the other party's pride. However, since the other party was behaving in such a manner, he couldn't be bothered to act courteously with the other party anymore either. You. Not expecting the other party to retort to his words, Liu Mo flung his sleeves furiously and harumphed. It doesn't matter whether you heard of me or not. I am an ordinary formation master in the Qingyuan Empire Formation Master Guild anyway. You are misunderstanding my words, I am not just referring to you. Shaking his head, Zhongxian looked at the other party earnestly and added, I am saying that I have never heard of guild leader Han as well. You! Nearly exploding with fury, Liu Mo's face turned crimson. Guild leader Han also nearly spurted blood on the spot. Even though he, Han Shu, couldn't say that his name was known throughout the entire Qingyuan conferred empire, he had at least been relatively well known for several centuries now. Each year, there were countless master teachers who wished to come under his tutelage in hopes of studying the way of formations from him. Yet, this fellow before him had actually shot him down along with his student. Yet, he simply couldn't flare up over this matter, or he would risk appearing petty. He felt so stifled that he could tear his hair out in frenzy. Hearing the conversation between the two, Luo Ruoxin couldn't help but chuckle. To bicker with this fellow. You will be the one spurting blood in the end. This fellow is one who doesn't care about conventions or rules, a person who dares to even insult Kongsha. To think that you can win against someone like that is indubitably a gross overestimation of yourself. Waving his hands leisurely, Zhongxian placed his hands behind his back before taking a step forward. All right, there is no need to get so agitated just because I don't know about you. As the principal of a master teacher academy, I have many things on my agenda. I don't have time to find out the names of every single lad who comes my way. He gazed deeply into the massive depression before him for a moment before saying, Wu Shi, prepare a formation flag for me. It will best if it's a grade 7 pinnacle formation flag. This. Wu Shi was conflicted. Seeing that the other party was intent on creating an opening to let out the energies, Liu Mo immediately stood up and roared furiously, hold it right there. Do you really intend to bring so many people down with you? Did that fellow know what kind of risk he was putting everyone under? He and his teacher had spent 2 days assessing the formation, but even they couldn't be entirely certain of their conclusion. Out of fear of the devastating explosion that could occur were they to fail, they dared not to even test it out. Yet, the other party had been here for only 10 minutes, and he was already eagerly trying to create an opening in the seal. There are more than 20,000 master teachers up here. Even if you are tired of living, you need not bring everyone down with you. While the other principals were doing their best to ensure the safety of their students, this lunatic was trying to have his students buried with him. To act so recklessly without getting a clear view of the situation, just how in the world did such a fool get nominated as Hong Yuan's principal? You are thinking too much. The reason the both of you aren't able to find the correct node to open the formation at, even after 2 days of effort, isn't because you aren't working hard enough but because you are fools. Naturally, I won't be the same as you two. Shaking his head, Zhongxian ignored the two and walked up to the depression. Principal Zhong. Upon seeing Zhongxian, the many students guarding the depression hurriedly stood up and looked at him with gazes of admiration. Yuan. You have all worked hard. Zhongxian nodded. It is our responsibility to work for the welfare of mankind, the students hurriedly replied. Seeing the other party walking up to the seal, Liu Mo turned to look at his teacher anxiously. Teacher, we mustn't allow that fellow to fool around. Don't worry, it is not that easy to find a node. Even after 2 days of effort, we were only able to deduce 5 plausible nodes. There is no way that he will be able to find one that easily. Guild leader Han shook his head. Honestly speaking, he didn't think that Zhongxian would be able to even deduce a plausible node that the energies could possibly be released from. After all, even a 7-star pinnacle formation master like him was unable to find it even after 2 days of effort, so how could a 6-star formation master possibly succeed? But I fear that he would recklessly create an opening in the seal despite his ignorance. If he gets it wrong, a calamity could very well befall us, Liu Mo said anxiously. Don't worry, even after he finds a node, he will need some time to create an opening to draw the energies out. We will have more than sufficient time to stop him. Guild leader Han waved his hands confidently. I was too rash. Hearing those words, Liu Mo heaved a sigh of relief. Indeed, finding a node required time, and creating an opening to channel the energies out required time as well. As esteemed figures, there was no need for them to fall out at this point yet. If the other party really intended to create an opening in the seal, it wouldn't be too late for them to stop it then. Yuan. I have heard a lot about this Principal Zhong, and it seems like he possesses extraordinary talent in the way of formations. It is a pity that he is still too young and reckless. However, this will be a good experience for him. Youngsters like him have to meet with a few failures before they learn that the world is far greater than what they can see. The way of formations is an extremely profound art. It is not something that someone who has just barely gotten a glimpse of it should speak lightly about. Guild leader Han chuckled. Let him give it a try first. Once he fails to find a node, he will realize his own ignorance. Yes. Hearing those words, Liu Mo couldn't help but direct a gaze of admiration toward his teacher. Do you see this? This is what a true master is like. Despite having been insulted by another, he is still thinking in the other party's stead. Ignoring the conversing duo, Zhongxian began assessing the seal before him carefully. Green lines gathered within his black eyes' eye of insight. This isn't working. This formation is too profound for my current eye of discernment and knowledge. I can't make sense out of it at all. Zhongxian shook his head. If it had been any other formation, even if it was a grade 7 pinnacle formation, with his eye of insight and his comprehension of formations, he would surely have been able to find its flaws and decipher it with sufficient time. But the one before him left him completely clueless. I will have to use the Library of Heaven's Path for this one. Sighing deeply, a frown emerged on Zhongxian's forehead. But to use the Library of Heaven's Path, I will have to find a way to activate the formation. I won't be able to find its flaws in its current dormant state. Frustrated, he pinched his glabella with his fingers. The Library of Heaven's Path could only compile a book on a formation when it was active. Even though the seal covering the ancient domain was suppressing the rampaging energies beneath it, it was actually still dormant. With the formation in such a state, Zhongxian wouldn't be able to compile a book on it even if he were to scream flaws. He would have to activate the formation, but how could he do so? Zhongxian fell into deep thought. He isn't using a compass at all? To be neither assessing the geographical terrain nor the flow of spiritual energy in the air. Does this fellow even know the first thing about formations? Liu Mo had been keeping a close eye on the arrogant Principal Zhong, wanting to see how the other party would find a node after bragging so much. However, he only saw the latter standing in a daze before the depression, pinching his glabella in frustration. For the other party to not take out his compass or even take a sweeping glance to assess his surroundings. How in the world would one assess a formation like that? Perhaps this might be a unique method he has learned somewhere. Guild leader Han was also bewildered by the sight before him. Let's hope that is the case. Wait a moment. What is he doing? Just as Liu Mo nodded in agreement, he suddenly caught sight of Principal Zhong's actions, and he nearly fainted from sheer shock. The other party had hesitated in front of the depression for a brief moment before abruptly lifting a massive boulder and tossing it into the depression. Chapter 1017 Zhongxian breaks the seal. 2. All kinds of defensive formations had been set up in the depression. Tossing a boulder over could be considered an attack, and it could very well incur the seal's retaliation. While the other formation masters were relying on their compasses to search for the crux of formidable formations to decipher them, this fellow had actually tossed a boulder in. This was no longer an attempt to decipher the formation but one to activate it. Even while the seal was dormant, the 20,000 of them here coupled with 2 powerful formation masters were already finding it hard to stabilize the seal. If it were to be activated, wouldn't it cause a huge calamity? Just what was in the mind of that fellow? Was there a loose screw in there or something? Otherwise, how could he make such a foolish decision? He was a 6-star pinnacle formation master, but he was making an error that even an apprentice formation master would know better than to do. Stifled, Han Shu and Liu Mo hurriedly rushed forward to stop the other party, but it was already too late. The boulder plummeted into the formation and came into contact with the seal. However, it didn't induce a change in the seal. Seeing that nothing had happened, Liu Mo heaved a sigh of relief. That was a close one. It seems like the seal only reacts to living beings, so it wasn't activated after coming into contact with the boulder. Otherwise, I can't even begin to imagine what would have happened. The seal was intricately linked to the rampaging energies that had accumulated beneath it. Once activated, there was a good chance that it could cause a disturbance in the energies below and cause them to act up once more, thus bringing more work to the already exhausted students. In the worst-case scenario, it might even induce an explosion on the spot. After the fellow tossed the boulder in, he had suddenly fallen still. As a 6-star pinnacle formation master, he must have realized how risky his previous action was and was trembling fearfully at the thought of what could have happened. Just as Liu Mo thought the other party would give up, the other party abruptly beckoned with his hand, and one of the students of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy rushed over. The other party leaned forward and whispered a few words into the other party's ears. A grim expression immediately surfaced on the student's face. Without any hesitation, he bellowed loudly and jumped straight into the depression, heading toward the seal. Pu. Not expecting that the other party would disregard his own student's welfare and send him to his death, Liu Mo felt so stifled that he nearly fainted on the spot. That fellow was a fool, but to think that his student would be even more foolish. To charge in like that. It was possible to activate the formation in such a manner, but the instant the formation came to life, that student would die. Preposterous. While Liu Mo was shocked by the sight before him, his teacher was completely enraged by the scene. While others regarded their own students as their own children, protecting and caring for them, this fellow actually sent his student into the depression to test out the seal. To recklessly place his student in such danger, just how much more ridiculous could he get? Stop right there. Bellowing furiously, Han Shu was just about to rush up to stop them when Zhong Xian abruptly stretched his hand forward and grasped tightly. His zhenqi shot forth like a rope, swiftly wrapping around the student who had just jumped into the depression. Just as he was about to come into contact with the seal, the zhenqi rope wrapped around the student abruptly pulled him back, dragging him out of the depression at an incredible speed. At the same time, the seal seemed to have sensed the presence of life, and brilliant radiance flickered from it. However, contrary to Han Shu's previous worry, the activation of the seal didn't cause the explosion of the energies below. Instead, the formation whirred into action for a short moment before slowing to a stop, as if its activation wasn't complete. What precise control! Guild leader Han Shu's face warped in astonishment. To be able to pull his student back in the very instant that the other party came into contact with the seal required an extremely deep understanding of the seal and very precise calculations of the positioning and velocity of his student. Even the slightest centimeter of difference could either cause the formation to completely activate and devour the student or the formation to not sense the student altogether and result in nothing happening at all. Of course, after the past 2 days of studying the formation, he was also capable of achieving the same feat. What truly left him astonished was the impressive teamwork and deep trust between the student and Principal Zhong. Had there been the slightest difference in the action just a moment ago, the outcome could very well have been vastly different. For the student to remain completely still while falling into the depression, not struggling in the slightest, it could only mean that he had complete trust in Principal Zhong. Furthermore, for the student to jump without any hesitation just because Principal Zhong told him to. If Han Shu were to issue the same command to Liu Mo, the latter was unlikely to do the same. It was not that Liu Mo didn't trust him, but there was a clear line of difference between trust and blind faith. After the student was retrieved, Principal Zhong froze on the spot once more, seemingly falling into a daze. A moment later, he turned around. Wu Shi, are you done preparing the Grade 7 Pinnacle Formation flag yet? After a moment of hesitation, Wu Shi flicked his wrist and passed a formation flag over. Here it is. On top of being a 7-star Pinnacle Master Teacher, he was a 7-star Formation Master as well. While his proficiency as a Formation Master was beneath that of Guild Leader Han, he still had a couple of Grade 7 Pinnacle Formation flags in his possession. Yuan taking the formation flag, Zhong Xian nodded in satisfaction. Without any hesitation, he stomped on the ground and flew into the air, heading toward the airspace right above the depression. Driving his zhenqi, he grasped his formation flag tightly, seemingly searching for a node to plant it into. That fellow has gone bonkers. Liu Mo, hurry up and stop him. Seeing that Principal Zhong was going to try creating an opening without even discussing the matter with them, Guild Leader Han nearly died of shock. He had seen reckless people in his lifetime, but never had he seen someone as reckless as that. Even if you have confirmed a node to plant your formation flag into, you should at least discuss the matter with us. To rush right over without saying a word at all. Are you really that confident that your judgment is correct? You must know that if you err, it won't just be the 20,000 master teachers on the swallow-embracing mountain who will pay for your mistake. It will be all living beings within a radius of 1,000 kilometers. This is truly making light of the matter. Yes. Hearing his teacher's command, Liu Mo immediately flitted right toward Zhongxian. At this moment, he was also extremely enraged by the impetuous actions of the other party. If he could, he really would tear the self-important fellow before him into pieces. Who? Liu Mo thrust his palm forward, and a powerful burst of zhenqi shot forth from his hands. In that instant, it seemed as if even the world had dulled before his powerful might as a Saint 3 Dan cultivator. Zhongxian was in the midst of searching for a node to stabilize the formation, but before he could make a move, he suddenly found that Liu Mo had launched an attack against him. His eyebrows immediately shot up in displeasure. This fellow, just what kind of insane streak was he on? They had only had a small verbal conflict earlier. As a 7-star formation master, surely he didn't need to be so narrow-minded. But since the other party had already made his move, he couldn't possibly sit idly and allow the other party to do as he pleased. With a deep frown, Zhongxian retaliated with a palm on his own. Hong Long. Zhongxian's palm carried immense strength as well. Clashing squarely with the other party's palm strike, a deafening explosion resounded in the air. Surprisingly, they were actually equally matched. What powerful strength! Liu Mo narrowed his eyes in alarm. Even though he had used less than 1/10 of his strength to stop the other party, the fact that the other party had been able to parry his blow so easily went to show that the other party wasn't just an ordinary nascent saint. With such strength, the other party was already on par with most Saint 2 Dan cultivators. Jeji. Liu Mo began gathering his strength once more to launch yet another attack at Zhongxian so as to force him to back down, but at that moment, a shrill sound abruptly echoed in the air. Following which, the deep rumbling of thunder suddenly boomed beneath the ground, threatening to burst forth at any moment. This is bad, the rampaging energies are going to strike again. Liu Mo's eyes widened in fear. The rampaging energies struck once every 10 minutes. Clearly, 10 minutes had just passed, and it was ready to strike once more. Liu Mo clenched his teeth tightly and roared furiously, "Stop what you're doing right there. If you don't wish to kill everyone here, you'd better stop moving right now." He knew full well that the rumbling heralded another burst of rampaging energies. It was already difficult for their group to withstand the burst as it was. If anything were to happen at this moment, their entire group might just be decimated. Knowing that he had to stop Zhongxian at all costs, his hand darted swiftly toward the other party. This was the most powerful attack he had. As soon as his hand clawed forward, the air surrounding the swallow-embracing mountain suddenly seemed to gather together, causing the flow of spiritual energy to halt. Seeing that Liu Mo was making a move against him once more, Zhongxian frowned in displeasure. What is that fool trying to do? Once the current wave of rampaging energies burst forth, the entire seal would be jolted, resulting in a slight deviation in the calculations he had made with great difficulty. Due to the precarious situation of the seal, even the slightest deviation in the force and positioning when creating the opening could result in a vastly different outcome. As such, there was no room for error at all. He had just managed to find the correct node, and all he had to do at the moment was plant the flag, then the crisis would be averted. Yet, this fellow had caused trouble at this crucial moment. Truly, there was nothing worse than a pig-like teammate. No, this won't do. The energies below are about to burst forth, and once it does, I will have to redo my calculations right from the start once more, Zhongxian thought anxiously. But this fellow is far stronger than me. I was only able to withstand his assault earlier because he underestimated me and didn't use his full strength. Now that he is putting his entirety into attacking me, he won't be able to kill me, but to dodge his attacks while successfully planting the formation flag into the node will be practically impossible. The planting of the formation flag should have been something that only took an instant, but the matter had been complicated with that fellow causing trouble. The other party was a Saint 3 Dan cultivator. Even with Zhong Xian's superior fighting prowess that allowed him to rival opponents stronger than him, he was still hardly a match for the other party. Since that's the case, pardon me. Knowing that he couldn't afford to be tied down by the other party at this crucial moment, Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes and bellowed loudly, "The students of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, listen to my command. Beat the living hell out of that fellow." Yes. Upon hearing their principal's command, the 20,000 students simultaneously released a war cry as they raised their palms together. Hong Long. Individually, these students weren't too powerful. A huge proportion of them were only at the Cosmos Bridge realm and Perfect Harmonization realm. However, when their strength was put together, they were a sight to behold. 20,000 surges of Zhenqi gathered together as one, forming a massive dragon that charged furiously toward Liu Mo. Under the overwhelming might produced by the collaborative strength of the students, even the surrounding space began to distort under the pressure. This is bad. Not expecting the other party to order all of his students to launch an attack against him, Liu Mo's face turned ashen. He could already hardly fend for himself at this point, let alone persist in his attack against Zhong Xian. Thus, he hurriedly retracted his palm and redirected his might toward the massive dragon headed toward him. The next instant, the moment the two forces collided, Liu Mo's figure was rocketed backward as if a cannonball, spewing out huge mouthfuls of blood in the midst of his flight. Even a Saint 5 Dan expert would have no choice but flee in the face of the combined might of the 20,000 students, let alone him. Good. Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. He could tell that his students had held back in their attack so that the other party wouldn't suffer any life-threatening damage. With the hindrance resolved, Zhong Xian hurriedly aimed the formation flag in his grasp toward a certain location, preparing to throw it in. Hold it right there. But before the formation flag could leave his grasp, he heard another bellow. Glancing over, Zhong Xian saw Guild Leader Han charging toward him as well. Hong Long Long. While Guild Leader Han made his move, the rumbling beneath the ground grew more and pronounced, heralding the imminent arrival of a devastating force. Knowing that it would be too late if he didn't make a move soon, Zhong Xian bellowed furiously once more. Beat him down as well. Yes. All of the students nodded simultaneously as they gathered their strength together once more, ready to strike down the lone figure in the air. You all dare. Guild Leader Han's face turned livid. He might have been a Saint 4 Dan pinnacle expert, but he was still unable to withstand the simultaneous attack from 20,000 students. Clenching his jaws tightly, he roared indignantly, "I am trying to save you all. If your principal's flag lands, all of you will be goners." Hong Long. But before he could finish his words, a powerful burst of radiance struck him. The vision before him darkened before he was rocketed into the distance, similar to Liu Mo. His body crashed heavily into a cliff face some distance away, and the impact cloaked his entire body with a layer of dust. Chapter 10:18. There's no need to tense up, it will be over once I put it in a little. Guild Leader Han was on the brink of madness. He just couldn't understand why these students had so much trust in that unreliable principal of theirs. No matter what, he had spent the past 2 days working closely alongside them as comrades, and a bond of camaraderie had been forged between them. Under normal circumstances, even if it was at the command of their principal, shouldn't they have at least hesitated before attacking him? Yet, without even bothering to spend time thinking the matter through, they had gathered their strength together and sent him flying. This was no longer obedience, it was more like they were Principal Zhong's devout followers. He had even informed them that they might very well lose their lives should their principal identify the wrong node, and yet, their attack hadn't even wavered in the slightest. What did this signify? It meant that they were all willing to stake their entirety on the 20-year-old youth before him without any hesitation. Even if the other party was their principal, surely they didn't need to trust him so much that they even abandoned their common sense. This was truly one of the most eccentric bunch of students he had ever met. Struggling up from a pile of fragmented rocks, he turned his gaze toward the sky once more and saw that the formation flag had already left Zhong Xian's hand, headed toward a node. We're doomed. Guild Leader Han's eyes were glazed with hopelessness. It happened that he had done the calculations for the node that the other party was throwing at as well, and it was a point where the energies were the most volatile. If a formation flag was thrown into that point, not only would it not alleviate the situation, it would even induce an explosion with utmost certainty. Who could have thought that he, Han Shu, despite the great fame and achievements he had accrued in his lifetime, would end up dying in such a manner, dragged down by an impertinent fellow who obstinately drove them down the path of demise? Just the thought of it left him feeling incredibly stifled, and he couldn't help but wallow in self-pity. Boom! The next moment, the rampaging energies beneath the ground finally gathered sufficient momentum to burst forth. Wang! The ground began to tremor with astonishing intensity. Caught off guard by the sudden shaking, a couple of students standing by the edge of the depression lost their balance and fell to the ground. Upon seeing such a sight, fear surfaced in the eyes of Wu Shi and the others. It seems like this burst is far stronger than the ones before. Guild leader Han's complexion turned incredibly awful as he shook his face in disbelief. This burst of energies was clearly many times stronger than the ones before. The seal suppressing the burst of energies distorted menacingly under the immense pressure, as if it would be torn to shreds at any moment. Even if every single person present were to devote their full strength to reinforcing the seal, it was still utterly impossible for them to suppress this burst of energies. Just what in the world happened? Why would there suddenly be such a powerful burst of energies? It's over. Guild leader Han despaired. They had barely hung on even when dealing with the weaker bursts of energies previously, so against such devastating force. Without a doubt, there was no way the seal could withstand this. The immense might would tear through the seal, inducing a massive explosion that would reduce everything within several thousand kilometers to dust. Just when he thought that all hope was lost, Principal Zhong's voice suddenly sounded from above. Here. There's no need to tense up. It will be over once I put it in a little. Right after those words were spoken, the formation flag flew forward at an even greater speed, stabbing right into the node the other party had identified beforehand. Who? As soon as the flag came into contact with the node, the imminently exploding seal suddenly lost its ferocity, as if a wolfhound whose tail had been stepped on. With a pop, it abruptly calmed down, becoming as gentle as the placid waters of a roadside puddle. Following which, a deafening blast sounded from the node, and an immense blast of energies burst toward the heavens. It was as if a hole had been pricked into a balloon, and the vast amount of gas trapped within, upon finally finding an escape route, hurriedly charged out of it. Due to the powerful blast, it felt as if the sky was going to be severed into two. The crisis has been resolved. Guild leader Han's body stiffened from shock. Unable to believe what he was seeing, he rubbed his eyes forcefully. Wasn't that node the area where the energies were the most volatile? How could the energies be released so smoothly right after the formation flag was planted into it? Guild leader Han wasn't the only one who was perplexed by the situation before him. Liu Mo, who had only just returned from his long flight, was dumbfounded by what he saw right after his return as well. Without using a compass or studying the terrain, the other party had simply picked up a formation flag and thrown it randomly, and the rampaging energies had been released just like that. Is there really such a maneuver in the way of formations? Why am I unaware of it even after studying formations for so many years? Liu Mo couldn't help but turn his eyes toward the students below, only to see them gazing at the sight before them with perfect nonchalance, as if knowing that their principal would be able to resolve the rampaging energies easily. He and his teacher had spent 2 whole days working on the formation, only to remain nearly as clueless as they had been at the start. On the other hand, the other party had casually planted a flag a few minutes after he arrived, and the crisis was resolved. Could it be that when the other party said that they were dumb earlier, it wasn't intended as an insult toward them but a simple fact? Just as Han Shu and Liu Mo were feeling deeply stifled within, they saw Zhong Xian slowly descending from the sky before eventually stopping before his students. You have worked hard for the past 2 days. The problem here has been resolved, so quickly return and have a good rest. Thank you, Principal Zhong. I knew it. There is nothing in the world that Principal Zhong can't possibly resolve. Guild leader Han was prattling on about being a 7-star pinnacle formation master or something a while ago, but from the looks of it now, it doesn't seem like he is anything much. Well, it is usually the incapable who find a need to boast about their own abilities. Look at our Principal Zhong, despite the great capabilities he possesses, has he even bragged about them even once? Indeed, Principal Zhong is simply too humble. I must learn from his example. Hearing the confirmation from their principal that the crisis had been resolved, a huge commotion broke out amid the crowd. Many faces reddened in agitation, and a huge number of students hurriedly sat onto the ground and began driving their cultivation technique to recuperate from their weakness and fatigue. 2 days of intense work had depleted them greatly, and quite a number of them had sustained significant internal injuries as a result. However, it was fortunate that there was nothing too severe. With sufficient time, they would all be able to make a full recovery. While the students were recuperating from their exertion, Zhongxian carefully assessed the condition of each individual student. Upon seeing any student whose injuries were too severe, he would step forward and treat them personally. No wonder. This explains why the students have unconditional trust in him, entrusting themselves to him without any hesitation at all. They don't just regard him as their principal, but their teacher, friend, and comrade as well. Witnessing this scene, guild leader Han and Liu Mo smiled bitterly. At this moment, they finally understood why the students had chosen to trust Zhongxian over them in the crucial moment. As a principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, the other party's standing could be said to be even above theirs. Yet, such a figure was taking care of 4-star and 5-star master teachers meticulously without the slightest hint of impatience. Just this in itself was something that most weren't able to do. All right. After confirming that his students were fine, Zhongxian returned to where Wu Shu and the others were standing. He turned his gaze toward guild leader Han and Liu Mo and clasped his fist hurriedly. Please do pardon my previous insolence. It was a critical situation then, and I feared that any delay could result in a disastrous outcome. Principal Zhong, there is no need to apologize to us. We are the ones who have acted rashly. Guild leader Han and Liu Mo's faces flushed crimson. If there was a hole in the ground at this moment, they would have surely leaped in without any hesitation. Their intentions had been out of goodwill. A mistake in that situation could have easily resulted in a disastrous outcome. Yet, they had nearly caused everyone's death due to their incompetence. The guilt that they were feeling at this moment weighed down on them heavily. It was fortunate that Principal Zhong had decisively commanded his students to knock them down in that moment, not bothering with etiquette. Otherwise, they would have gone down in history as sinners. It will take some more time for the energies to be released, and the seal isn't going to open anytime soon. Since that's the case, why don't we return to Fire Source City for the time being and await the arrival of those from the Combat Master Hall? Zhongxian proposed. While the situation with the seal had been resolved, it would still take some time before they would be able to enter it. For one, it would take at least 2 to 3 days for the immense buildup of rampaging energies beneath the seal to disperse completely. Furthermore, the members from the Combat Master Hall and the other 3 Master Teacher Academies hadn't arrived yet. To maximize the expedition's chances of success, it would be best for them to venture in only after the full team had arrived. All right. Nodding, the crowd got onto an aerial Saint Beast and flew back to Fire Source City. Zhongxian and the others were settled into a huge manor that the regional master teacher pavilion owned. As for the 20,000 students, Zhongxian arranged for school head Zhao and the others to take them back to the academy. Threats were bound to be lurking throughout the ancient domain, and it would be too dangerous for the students to join the expedition as well. A day later, the principals and elders of the other 3 Master Teacher Academies, as well as those from the Combat Master Hall, finally arrived. Liao Song had escorted Zheng Yang to the Combat Master Hall headquarters and hadn't returned yet. However, 2 Saint 3 Dan Pinnacle 1,000-men commanders had been dispatched instead. You are Principal Zhong? Upon seeing Zhongxian, one of the 2,000-men commander immediately emanated a deep aura of hostility. He had heard about the Combat Master Hall's tragic defeat in the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, and he also knew that even though the cultivation of the young man before him was at nascent saint, his true fighting prowess was far greater than even combat masters like them. That's right. Zhongxian nodded. Do you dare have a match with me? The 1,000-men commander challenged. A match? A troubled look surfaced on Zhongxian's face. All he wanted to do was keep a low profile and peacefully remain as the dashing young man he was in the background. Was that really that much to ask for? Being too outstanding sure was tiring. Indeed. Do you dare accept my challenge or not? The 1,000-men commander eyed Zhongxian provocatively. It is the first time we are meeting, and it won't do for us to sour our relationship with a match like that. Why don't you allow me to treat you to a drink instead? Zhongxian took out a wine gourd and offered it to the other party earnestly. However, the 1,000-men commander shook his head and harumphed coldly. You don't want to accept my challenge? Very well. I will find a way to show you that the Combat Master Hall isn't an organization that anyone can humiliate. After which, he turned around and left. Through asking around, Zhongxian learned that the name of the 1,000-men commander was Feng Zun, and he was one of the more pro-combat members of the Combat Master Hall. When he heard that the combat masters who had gone to Hongyuan to assess the potential candidates had been thrashed instead, he couldn't help but feel great hostility toward the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. Ever since then, he had been wanting to spar with Zhongxian to regain the Combat Master Hall's dignity. The other 1,000-men commander of the Combat Master Hall went by the name of Jiang Yuan, and while he looked amicable on the surface, his eyes were filled with fighting will as well. Combat masters had always been synonymous with the word invincible, and yet, they had actually suffered multiple setbacks when facing the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. As 1,000-men commanders, they viewed it as their responsibility to recover the dignity of the Combat Master Hall. Mu Shi walked up to Zhongxian and explained, Senior Uncle, our Qingyuan conferred empire has dispatched 4 men for this mission. Me, Wu Shu, Guild Leader Han, and Liu Mo. As for the Combat Master Hall, other than Feng Zun, Jiang Yuan, and Zhuo Qingfeng, there are another 12 more combat masters. Last but not least, for the 3 Master Teacher Academies, the 3 principals have come with 2 elders each, making up 9 people in total. All in all, our expedition team has a strength of around 30 or so. Yuan Zhongxian nodded. Initially, Zhao Bingshu and the others had wanted to join the expedition team as well, but Zhongxian hadn't agreed to it. The ancient domain was lurking with danger. Should something bad befall him, the 10 great master teachers should at least be around to take care of the academy, or else it would fall into chaos. According to my calculations, the ancient domain will open tomorrow. We will be setting forth tomorrow morning, Mu Shi said. All right. Zhongxian nodded. After bidding Mu Shi farewell, Zhongxian returned to his residence, and just as he was about to rest, he noticed Luo Ruoxin sitting on one of the stone seats in his courtyard. Her right elbow was pressed against the stone table, her right fist supporting her head. A contemplative look was on her face, but it was impossible to tell what she was thinking of. Chapter 10:19. Holding hands, she seemed to be a little out of it, such that she didn't even notice when Zhongxian walked over. The brilliant moon cast a pale glow upon her body, making her appearance reminiscent of an ethereal fairy who could fly away in the next moment. Today's off like that, what are you thinking of? Zhongxian asked with a smile. Nothing much. Recovering from her daze, Luo Ruoxin shook her head. Standing up, she glanced at the brilliant moon and asked, Will you accompany for a walk outside? Zhongxian was taken aback by the request for a moment before delight captured his entire face. Without a second's delay, he replied excitedly, Of course, it will be my pleasure too. Seeing the other party's excited expression, Luo Ruoxin shook her head with a helpless smile. Do you display your emotions explicitly in everything else you do as well? Most people would usually try their best to conceal their delight before her, wanting to appear dignified and cultured. Yet, this fellow was the complete opposite. He was candid and straightforward, doing whatever was on his mind without any worry at all. His carefree personality sure was enviable. The abrupt question left Zhongxian a little nervous. Actually, I have been concealing something all this while. Oh. Hearing those words, Luo Ruoxin's interest was piqued. Turning her beautiful eyes to him, she said, Tell me about it. To be honest, I am a peaceful person who prefers to maintain a low profile, but things somehow never go the way I want them to. Zhongxian shook his head. Low profile? Seeing how earnestly the other party was saying those words, Luo Ruoxin burst into laughter. The forlorn expression on her face from a moment ago vanished from sight, and she couldn't help but remark, "You sure have concealed it well, I couldn't tell at all." No matter where that fellow went, he was always the brightest star in everyone's sight. There couldn't be anyone that was even more high profile than him. And yet, at this moment, he was actually saying that he was a peaceful person who preferred to maintain a low profile. Where was his face? She would usually be repulsed by such shamelessness, but for some reason, she didn't have such a reaction toward the young man beside her. On the contrary, being alongside the other party left her feeling very relaxed, bringing her tranquility. At the other party's reaction, Zhongxian shook his head. "I knew that you wouldn't believe me." He was truly a low-profile person in the depths of his heart, but fate just loved to play tricks on others. Too outstanding, he shone brightly like a firefly in the dark no matter where he went, unable to conceal his glow no matter what he did. Ha 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 ha. Seeing the other party's serious response, Luo Ruoxin couldn't help but chuckle once more. Beneath the night sky, amid chatter, the duo walked out of the manor they were staying in. The onset of the night had brought the scorching temperatures down considerably. Tempted by the cooling weather, those who had been hiding in their homes before stepped out of their doors, filling the streets with a huge crowd. Zhongxian had no idea what kind of method Luo Ruoxin used to disguise herself, but despite her beautiful appearance, she didn't seem to stand out from the crowd. As such, while there were exclamations of marvel from time to time, they didn't catch too many eyes. After walking a distance, Zhongxian suddenly came to a halt and pointed forward. Due to the peculiar climate of Firesaw City, it has many unique delicacies that can't be found anywhere else. There is a tavern just ahead, so why don't we rest there for a moment and try out their local cuisine? Luo Ruoxin glanced ahead and saw a grand building. Above the entrance of the building hung a plaque with 3 words on it: Dream Reminiscence Tavern. Life, a reminiscence of a dream. A lifetime of haste and worries, perchance better spent merrymaking with wine. What a poetic name. Luo Ruoxin remarked meaningfully. The interior of the tavern was extravagantly designed, but it had a warm atmosphere as well. The attendants that were moving around the place possessed a cultivation of transcendent mortal 5 dan at the very least. With just a look, it was apparent that the tavern was anything but simple. "Guests, this way please." An attendant welcomed them before settling them into a table for 2 by the window. Zhongxian shot Luo Ruoxin a glance, and only after confirming that the latter wasn't unhappy with this arrangement did he heave a sigh of relief and sit down. "Bring us a plate of all of your specialties please." "Sure thing." The attendant hurriedly left, and before long, a huge array of delicacies and a bottle of fine wine were spread out grandly on the table before them. Zhongxian had to admit that the food and wine in this tavern were indeed excellent. The earth flames that Firesaw City was rich in didn't just bring about superior weapons, it was also the key to the exceptionally fragrant wine they produced in the region. Just a single sip could make one addicted to it, craving more. This golden lake carp is a unique species found only in the Golden Lake on the Swallow-embracing mountain. It only reproduces once every 10 years, making it very short in supply. It has no scales, and its flesh is particularly fresh too. It is best when steamed with yellow wine. This is the liver of the blue sparrow. Just steam it with a slight touch of sesame oil, and it will be ready to be feasted upon. This dish is not only rich in spiritual energy, its taste is also top-notch. This is the famous green-tip bamboo meat of Firesaw City. Its main ingredient is green-tip bamboo, a plant that only grows in Firesaw City. Once heated up, it will gain a texture reminiscent of bacon, giving a nice crisp to it. Zhongxian introduced the various dishes as they feasted on the food before them. With just a taste, he could compile a book on each of them in the Library of Heaven's Path. Putting aside introducing the dishes, he could easily point out dozens of flaws in the cooking without repeating any points. "You are a gourmet." Luo Ruoxin was surprised to hear the other party's detailed introduction of the dishes. Despite the young age of the man seated before her, he possessed strength far beyond his age, and his mastery of his supporting occupations was also formidable. It was almost as if there was nothing in the world that he was incapable of. This was especially so for gourmet. It was one of the most inconspicuous occupations of the lower 9 paths, and they would usually only be responsible in trying out new dishes and introducing them to noble personages. As such, they didn't have much standing. Thus, she couldn't help but be perplexed that the principal of a master-teacher academy would actually spend his time on studying it as well. I happen to have read some books on them in the past, so I do know a little bit here and there, Zhongxian explained. Impressive, you sure are well read, Luo Ruoxin complimented. A stark contrast to Zhongxian wolfing down the food without the slightest bit of elegance, Luo Ruoxin ate gracefully in small mouthfuls. Her subtle mannerisms hinted at the fine upbringing she had. After having their fill of good, Zhongxian turned to Luo Ruoxin and said, "If you have anything on your mind, perhaps speaking of it will make you feel better. My cultivation might be low, but I am still capable of resolving most problems." He could tell that the other party had some troubles on her mind, and that was also why he had been jesting around, hoping to put the other party in a better mood. However, it seemed like his efforts weren't really paying off. "It's nothing much." Luo Ruoxin paused for a brief moment before shaking her head. "It's just that I have met with some matters recently that made me a little homesick." "Homesick? You? Are you really from one of the sage clans, the Luo clan?" Zhongxian asked doubtfully. There had been many rumors regarding Luo Ruoxin's true identity going around the Master Teacher Academy, the notable ones being that she was from the esteemed Luo clan. Otherwise, it didn't make sense for even a 7-star master teacher like Mu She to treat her so respectfully. "Sage clan?" The young lady shook her head with a smile, neither admitting nor denying it. Instead, she looked at Zhongxian and asked, "What about your family? Where are they? I haven't really heard you talking about them before." Seeing that Luo Ruoxin was unwilling to speak of the matter, Zhongxian decided not to ask too much about it either. "I don't have any family members. I am an orphan." "An orphan?" Luo Ruoxin was slightly stunned by the response. "Yuan, I did not have any kin while growing up," Zhongxian said. He had never met any of his kin after transcending from Earth. Not only so, his previous self also had no recollection of the sort. It was through great hard work that his previous self had managed to become a teacher of Hongtian Academy, but even so, he had ended up causing his students' cultivation to go berserk and nearly had his license revoked. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring it up," Luo Ruoxin hurriedly apologized. "It's fine, I am already used to it. I'm quite happy with my situation. I am able to travel wherever I want to freely without any care in the world." Zhongxian chucked. In a sense, he also liked his current lifestyle as well. Journeying through the world freely, there was nothing to tie him down other than the couple of direct disciples he had. "You sure are optimistic." Luo Ruoxin could see in the other party's eyes that he was indeed enjoying the current life he had, and she nodded in approval. Without any backing or connections, he had been able to rise to the position of the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy by the time he was 20 through his own hard work. While other party might seem unreliable at times, there was no doubt that he was a person worthy of respect. Just by the unconditional trust the students had in him and the unwavering loyalty the academy elders showed him, all of this was testimony to his outstanding capability. As long as he was around, even the most impossible of tasks could be resolved easily. There were plenty of outstanding figures around her, and most of them were far stronger than the young man before her when they were at his age. However, that was due to their high starting point. Were they to start from the same origin, there would probably be less than a handful who could catch up to him. To reach nascent Saint Pinnacle at such a young age and become the principal of a Master Teacher Academy, winning the unwavering loyalty of the students and acknowledgement of the world, his charisma was something that very few could match. What particularly stood out was the other party's mental resilience. Even in the face of a crisis, he could retain his composure and resolve it perfectly. As long as he was given time to grow, there was no doubt that he would achieve great things in the future. Unknowingly, Luo Ruoxin's view of the young man before her had changed tremendously. In the past, she had only felt a peculiar intimacy toward him. However, as time passed, she had gradually realized that he possessed a radiance unmatched by anyone else in the world, leaving the others paling in comparison. Her eyes couldn't help but be drawn to him. Unknowingly, the young man had stoked a peculiar sentiment within her. It was just a sliver at the moment, but it was something that had never happened before. Let's return. After chatting for a while longer, they began making their way back to the manor. The brilliant moon hanging high in the night sky drew out long, slender shadows behind the both of them. A light breeze blew, and the faint fragrance of the young lady drifted in the air. It was a comfortable scent. Zhongxian had never felt so tranquil before in his life. His hand stretched forward and touched the back of the young lady's hand. It felt soft and smooth, reminiscent of cotton. Luo Ruoxin's body stiffened slightly as she instinctively retracted her hand and hugged it before her chest. With a reddened face, she exclaimed, "I will be going on ahead first." After saying those words, she rushed off. In an instant, she had already disappeared from view. "She's gone," Zhongxian remarked lamentably. Slapping his forehead, he shook his head in utmost regret. Why did I have to do that? If he hadn't reached out for her hand, he could still have been walking with her. Perhaps, they could have chatted a little longer. If the other party were to blame him for this matter, would they be unable to remain friends? How could he have been so foolish? Vexed, Zhongxian decided to just assess the other party's attitude tomorrow morning before deciding what he could do. Hopefully, if the other party wasn't too angry, he could just feign ignorance and get along with her as if nothing had happened. Shaking his head, he was just about to make his way back to the manor when a sound suddenly echoed from the depths of the alley. "Farewell, my kin and my friends. I have truly brought all of you great shame." Perplexed, Zhongxian walked over and saw a man in his early 30s kneeling before the entrance of a residence, grieving sorrowfully. His body was covered with fresh blood, and his face was cloaked with a layer of dust, giving him an unkempt appearance. It was likely that he had just survived some kind of dangerous situation. "Farewell." After kowtowing a few more times, the middle-aged man stood up. He flicked his wrist, and a sword appeared in his hands. He placed it against his neck as he prepared to slit his throat. He is committing suicide. Not expecting to meet with a person trying to end his life while walking along the streets, Zhongxian hurriedly flicked his finger. Wang! A burst of light shot forth, and the sword was struck out of the man's grip. It pierced deeply into a nearby wall, vibrating endlessly. Chapter 1020. Violet gilt metal. Having his sword abruptly knocked flying, the middle-aged man was taken aback. He hurriedly turned his head around and saw a young man walking over. "Even ants struggle to continue living, so why do you seek the end?" Zhongxian said. Walking closer, he noted that the middle-aged man possessed a cultivation of transcendent mortal 9 dan primary stage. With such strength, he could definitely be considered as an expert in Fire Source City. "I appreciate Elder's concern, but I desire nothing more than death." Knowing that a person who could flick his sword off his hand from a distance away was bound to be far stronger than him, the middle-aged man replied respectfully, not underestimating the other party just because of his young age. Nevertheless, there was still a forlorn gaze in his eyes. "To be able to cultivate to a level like yours before 30, you are quite an outstanding genius. What is it that left you in such deep despair, such that even living has become a chore to you?" Zhongxian asked, intrigued. Even with the rich resources in Fire Source City, a person who could reach transcendent mortal 9 dan before 30 could be considered to be an outstanding genius. A person as talented as the other party had a bright future ahead of him, so why was he attempting to end his life? "I really can't bring myself to continue living any longer." The middle-aged man shook his head. In Fire Source City, a land rich in earth flames, the most respected occupation is blacksmith. From 7, I have been studying under Grandmaster Blacksmith Sun Jin as an apprentice. I thought that I would eventually be accepted as his student and rise to great heights. But who knew that I would fail the blacksmith examination for 10 years consecutively? For 24 whole years, I have remained as a mere apprentice. A person as dull-witted and incapable as me doesn't deserve to live. I have truly brought shame to my family members and the occupation. You have been an apprentice for 24 years. Zhongxian was taken aback. So, you aren't even a 1-star blacksmith at the moment? Going by the ranking standard, a transcendent mortal 9 dan expert should have been a 5-star pinnacle blacksmith at the minimum. Yet, to still remain as an apprentice. Was this for real? Could there really be such an untalented person in the world? UN. Every time I attempt to forge a weapon, I will find myself being unable to control the temperature of the earth flames well, resulting in the metal ingot going to ruins. After the previous examination I had, my teacher finally couldn't stand in incompetence any longer and evicted me from his lineage. My family members are still anticipating the day which I become a blacksmith and bring glory to our family name, and yet, I ended up letting all of them down instead. What rights do I have to face the world? The more the middle-aged man spoke about his matter, the more depressed he became. Zhongxian was slightly surprised. A transcendent mortal 9-dan expert had been studying smithing ever since he was 7, and yet hadn't cleared the 1-star blacksmith examination even after 24 years of effort. No matter how untalented the other party was, surely it couldn't possibly be to such an extent. If that was true, it wouldn't be too hard to imagine the despair the other party was feeling. But just what could have happened for him to be unable to clear even the 1-star blacksmith examination? Zhongxian was perplexed. It might be challenging for a Tongxian Realm 1 cultivator to clear the 1-star blacksmith examination, but as a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert, a person who had cultivated his soul and was capable of precise movements, how could the other party be incapable of smithing a mortal tier weapon and qualify as a 1-star blacksmith? I have no idea as well. Somehow, I am just unable to successfully smith a weapon. The middle-aged man shook his head. His multiple failures in the examination had sapped him of his confidence. Unable to smith a weapon? Perplexed, Zhongxian looked at the middle-aged man before him with a frown and asked, "Can you smith the most basic weapon you know of for me?" To think that a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert would be incapable of clearing even a mere 1-star blacksmith examination, this was something that was completely inconceivable to Zhongxian. It was simply ridiculous. There was no one out in the world who would dare believe this to be true. "Elder, thank you for saving my life, but I have already made up my mind. Even if I were to smith that weapon, it won't change my mind. A person as useless as me will be better off dead." The middle-aged man bowed deeply and said, "There is plenty of time for you to seek the end. There is no need to rush into it now. I happen to be a rather experienced blacksmith myself, and I am intrigued by the problem you are afflicted by. Perhaps, if you show me your smithing process, I might just be able to identify the root of your problem and help you resolve it." Zhongxian said. If the other party was determined on attempting suicide, there was nothing he could do about it. However, the fact that a transcendent mortal 9-dan was unable to qualify as a 1-star blacksmith after so many years of effort was bewildering to him, and he felt that there was a need to get to the bottom of it. The middle-aged man hesitated. "Since you are going to end your life anyway, it shouldn't matter, right? It won't be too late for you to do whatever you want to after I fail." Zhongxian smiled. "Very well then." The middle-aged man nodded. Indeed. Since he was going to end his life, what did he have to lose? There is a chamber which I use for smithing weapons not too far away. All of the required items for smithing are there, so let's head over. After saying these words, the middle-aged man led the way ahead. Not too long later, they arrived at a rather small chamber. The chamber had everything that a blacksmith would need, be it earth flames or cauldron. There was a rack placed alongside one of the walls which was filled with a lot of ores. There were a couple of them that were extremely rare, such that it would be difficult to find them in the market. Despite the middle-aged man's low proficiency in smithing, it seemed like he was quite a collector of ores. Assessing the area, Zhongxian's gaze suddenly fell on one of the ores, and his eyelids began twitching in shock. "Is that violet gilt metal?" Violet gilt metal was an extremely rare ore which could be infused into certain types of weapons to boost its might. Using this ore and a smithing technique that complements it, I will be able to induce a breakthrough in the golden origin cauldron. Zhongxian's eyes gleamed in agitation. Having made a promise to the golden origin cauldron back when the latter first submitted to him, he had been looking into the various methods of raising its strength. However, due to the lack of required ores, he had no choice but to put off the matter aside again and again. Who could have thought that he would find the required ore here? "I am going to start." Oblivious to Zhongxian's astonishment, the middle-aged man said nonchalantly before walking up to his weapon cauldron. Driving his zhengqi, his hand grasped forward to draw the earth flames from the ground. A searing blaze surged into the chamber, and under the overwhelming heat, the chamber walls glowed crimson. The middle-aged man flicked his wrist and took out a metal hammer. After which, he grabbed a piece of iron and placed it into the cauldron. A few moments later, after the iron had softened under the intense heat, he began to hammer it. Ding ding dang dang. Under the powerful hammering, it didn't take long for the iron ingot to be shaped into a sharp sword. Zhongxian had to acknowledge that the middle-aged man had reached an incredible mastery in his forging skills, superior to even a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith like him. Soon, after the shaping of the weapon was finally forged, the middle-aged man extended his hand forward once more, intending to draw earth flames to temper the weapon. Yet, at this moment, the earth flames suddenly ran out of control. It rushed forward with astonishing ferocity, reducing the freshly forged weapon back into a pile of metallic fluid, thus rendering his previous efforts futile. Failure again. I knew that I couldn't possibly succeed. Sighing deeply, despondency surfaced in the middle-aged man's eyes. He couldn't help but wish for a miracle to happen each time he forged. Perhaps, he might just succeed this time. Yet, like many times before, his prayers hadn't come true. In contrast to the middle-aged man's despondency, Zhongxian frowned after seeing the other party's smithing process. With his eye of discernment, even without the Library of Heaven's Path, he was still able to easily see through the issues in the other party's smithing. There wasn't any significant mistake in the other party's forging, but as for the tempering, it appeared that there was a conflict between the other party's zhengqi and the earth flames, resulting in the other party's inability to control the earth flames. As a result, the earth flames ended up running out of control, devouring the forged weapon clean. To put it in other words, the issue lay in not what the other party had done but the internal condition of his body. The zhengqi in the other party's body happened to have an attribute that was at odds with the earth flames, causing the earth flames to run amok. This was also the reason why the forged weapon ended up becoming a pile of metallic liquid when he attempted to temper it, rendering his efforts futile. Surely a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith should be able to tell that there is a conflict between his zhengqi and the earth flames. Zhongxian frowned. What that had left Zhongxian baffled wasn't how difficult it was to discern the middle-aged man's problem but how easy it was to do so. It was understandable that the middle-aged man wasn't aware of it as he wasn't even a 1-star blacksmith yet, thus he wasn't qualified to access books beyond that of an apprentice. However, there was no way a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith could be oblivious to it. It was fundamental knowledge for them, but if so, why didn't the Sun Jin person whom the other party spoke about inform the other party of the matter? Why didn't he try to correct the other party's flaw? Wait a moment. As Zhongxian contemplated over the matter, his eyebrows suddenly leaped up. The reason why a conflict would occur was due to one's cultivation technique being incompatible with the earth flames. But if the middle-aged man had started learning smithing from that Sun Jin person ever since he was 7, how could he still suffer from such a fundamental issue? Unless it was done on purpose. Zhongxian's eyes narrowed into slits. Given the circumstances surrounding the middle-aged man, the only possible reasoning for such a situation was that someone had intentionally taught him the wrong cultivation technique from the start. But what did that person have to gain from teaching him the wrong cultivation technique? Perplexed, Zhongxian scanned the room to see if he could find any clues when a thought suddenly surfaced in his mind. Turning to the middle-aged man, he asked, "Are you the one who found these ores?" "That's right." The middle-aged man nodded, slightly baffled by Zhongxian's abrupt question. Due to the high concentration of earth flames around Firesource City, there are plenty of ores in the area. Through the natural affinity between the ores and my zhengqi, I am able to locate them quite easily. Natural affinity between the ores and your zhengqi? That's right. Our cultivation techniques are imparted by Sun Jin Laroche. As long as we cultivate hard, we will gain a keen sensitivity towards ores, allowing us to find them easily. The middle-aged man nodded. Are there many who cultivate the same cultivation technique as you? Zhongxian asked. The middle-aged man contemplated for a brief moment before replying, "There are. There are around 30 apprentices who had studied alongside me back then. However, most of them were devoured by the earth flames while searching for ores, so there are only me and another one left. Is the other surviving person unable to become a blacksmith as well? As if having come to a realization, Zhongxian asked grimly. That's right. He's a year older than me, and unable to stand the shame from consecutive failure, he eventually succumbed to the pressure and ended his life last year. Recalling the fate of his companion, the middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. To be unable to qualify as a blacksmith even after studying for so many years, it wasn't too difficult to imagine how despondent the other party must have felt. Committed suicide? Zhongxian was astonished. He took a sweeping gaze around the room before asking, then, where do the ores you collect go to? Surely there should be more than this. Since the middle-aged man had an uncanny ability to locate ores, he must have found many of them in the past 24 years of his life. He should have collected far more ores than those present in the room. I did collect quite a lot, but most of them have gone to Sun Jin Laroche as tuition fee. He has taught me ever since I was young, imparting me much valuable knowledge. Even though I was still unable to become a blacksmith in the end, I am still deeply indebted to him. It is only right that I pay tuition fee to him. The middle-aged man replied. Tuition fee? I see, I finally get it. Having finally made sense of the entire story, a chilling glint flashed across Zhongxian's eyes. In that instant, his face turned terrifyingly cold. Chapter 1021. The despicable Sun Jin. After hearing those words, Zhongxian confirmed that blacksmith Sun Jin whom the other party spoke of had never intended to take the middle-aged man as his disciple in the first place. From the start to the end, that Sun Jin fellow had only regarded the other party as a mere tool for procuring ores. In the gaps between the tectonic plates, valuable ores were usually produced alongside earth flames. As such, in places where earth flames could be found, there were bound to be plenty of valuable ores as well. That Sun Jin fellow had intentionally made the middle-aged man cultivate a zhenqi that was at odds with the earth flames, thus making it easier for the other party to sense areas rich in earth flames. But cultivating such a cultivation technique meant that the latter would be unable to control the earth flames, making it impossible to smith. In other words, Sun Jin had never intended to allow the middle-aged man to become a blacksmith. Working as a blacksmith might have been lucrative, but selling those ores was even more so. For a teacher to commit such an atrocity, Zhongxian was enraged. It was one thing if he had never encountered it, but now that he had, there was no way he could let the other party off. Black sheep like this had to be weeded from society. Even though the other party wasn't a master teacher, he had assumed the name of a teacher to intentionally misguide others. This was completely unacceptable. The 30 apprentices who had come under Sun Jin's tutelage alongside the middle-aged man had thought that they could rise to glory with a great 6-star blacksmith teaching them personally. Yet, due to Sun Jin's misguidance, their dreams had been shattered. Most of them had ended up dying while searching for ores for him, and even the fortunate survivor had ended up ending his life from the sheer despair of being unable to become a blacksmith. To Sun Jin, they were probably just disposable pawns. As mere apprentices, they weren't qualified to learn his true teachings. Thus, their inability to become blacksmiths didn't harm his reputation by too much. On the contrary, the others might even think that it was those apprentices who were lazy and incapable, being unable to achieve anything despite coming under the tutelage of an esteemed 6-star pinnacle blacksmith. Most likely, it was such overwhelming criticism that eventually pushed the middle-aged man to take the final step. Had Zhongxian not heard of it himself, he would never have dared believe that there could be such a contemptible individual in the Firesource City Blacksmith Guild. Those who imparted their teachings and dispelled the doubts of others were granted the noble title teacher. As an esteemed blacksmith, an upper 9 paths occupation, if Sun Jin had attempted to search for mercenaries to gather ores for him, he would surely have been able to do so easily. Just that, being found doing so could possibly sully his reputation, and the profits he stood to earn would be significantly lower as well. Whereas, by accepting a few apprentices and pretending to be a teacher to them, their act of gathering ores for him could be justified as filial piety, allowing him to take them for free without suffering the condemnation of others. On top of that, He could also conveniently toss them aside once he was done with them, and this was indeed what he had done. Despite studying under a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith for so many years, I am still unable to smith even the most basic mortal weapon. No matter where I go, I am viewed with disdain by others, such that even my family members were mocked due to my incompetence. If all my existence does is bring shame to others, I might as well end my life right here, right now. Seeing the elder before him fall into deep contemplation, the middle-aged man thought that the other party wasn't able to find a solution to his problem as well, and disappointment crept into his eyes. It was one thing if he was the only one being mocked, but for his family members to have to face mockery from the public due to him, this was something that he couldn't accept. Seeing that the middle-aged man had lost all fighting will within him, Zhongxian shook his head and consoled him. There's no need to get so downhearted. I have already identified the root problem as to why you are unable to smith. As long as you trust me, I will help you resolve your problem. Not only so, I will help you advance to become a 5-star or even a 6-star blacksmith. But as much as those words were consolation, they weren't lies. He did possess the ability to do so. It might have been difficult for others to alter a cultivation technique, but with the sharp eye of discernment and vast knowledge that Zhongxian possessed, creating a new cultivation technique to resolve the flaws of the current one that the other party was cultivating wasn't entirely impossible. Of course, Zhongxian had to first find out what kind of cultivation technique the middle-aged man was cultivating first. Zhongxian had used his eye of insight to carefully assess the middle-aged man when he smithed earlier, and it seemed like the cultivation technique that the other party had been taught was incomplete. As the information he received he wasn't complete, he had to obtain the full copy so as to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Become a 5-star or 6-star blacksmith? The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment after hearing those words before shaking his head, and the disappointment in his eyes deepened further. He had thought that, considering the immense capability that the elder before him had displayed, the other party might have had a way to resolve his problem. Yet, who could have known that the other party would end up spouting such nonsense? A person who was incapable of even smithing the most basic mortal tier weapon, how could he possibly ever become a 5-star or even 6-star blacksmith? Wasn't this a mere daydream? The middle-aged man turned his gaze toward Zhongxian and spoke with an immensely weak and bitter voice. Do you find my plight very hilarious? Are you here to make a mockery of me before I end my life? Make a mockery of you? Zhongxian hadn't expected to hear such words from the other party's mouth, and he was dumbfounded for a moment. However, it didn't take him long to understand the rationale behind the other party's words. To tell a man who had failed the 1-star blacksmith examination for 24 years straight that he could become a 5-star or 6-star blacksmith, it was no wonder the other party would think that he was mocking him. Without explaining anything, Zhongxian spoke with a confident smile on his face. Don't worry, I don't have the habit of making empty promises. I mean what I say. If it still didn't work out at the end, he could always just destroy the other party's cultivation and impart a simplified version of the Heaven's Path divine art to him. Even though the middle-aged man was at transcendent mortal 9 Dan, even if he started cultivating from scratch, it wouldn't take too long. You mean what you say? A feat that even Sun Jin Larosha is unable to achieve, how do you expect me to believe you? Are you really a blacksmith? A hint of doubt surfaced in the middle-aged man's eyes. Any blacksmith would understand the difficulties in advancing through the ranks, and yet, the other party spoke of reaching 5-star and 6-star as if it was a mere walk in the park. Wasn't that clearly boasting? Of course. Flicking his wrist, Zhongxian took out his blacksmith emblem, and 6 brilliant stars shone brightly on it. You are a 6-star blacksmith. The middle-aged man was stunned to see the emblem, but a moment later, he shook his head and said, I don't believe you. There is a chance that the emblem might belong to someone else, or it might even be a fake altogether. Unless you smith a spirit pinnacle weapon before my eyes, you won't be able to convince me that you are a 6-star blacksmith. It was inevitable that the middle-aged man would be skeptical of Zhongxian. All of the 6-star blacksmiths he had encountered were at least in their 50s, so it was hard for him to even fathom that a young man in his 20s could possibly reach such a height. Zhongxian was slightly stunned by the other party's sudden request. He had received his blacksmith emblem fair and square through an examination at the Master Teacher Academy. Naturally, it was nothing much for him to show his ability to the other party. What he had to do now was to win the other party's trust first. Otherwise, if the other party were to insist on ending his life, there would be nothing he could do. Why? You aren't able to smith anything at all? So, the words you have said are all lies to console me? Noting Zhong Xian's hesitation, the eyes of the middle-aged man turned despondent. Of course not. Smithing a weapon means nothing to me. Seeing that he could very well lose the other party's trust if he didn't show his ability, Zhong Xian replied with a slight smile and stepped forward. Allow me to use your oars. Saying that, Zhong Xian walked up to the rack by the wall and casually selected 4 different oars before tossing them into the cauldron not too far away. After which, he drove his zhengqi, and the earth flames immediately surged up, scorching the 4 oars crimson. In just a moment, they began melting. The impurities contained within the ore were burned away, leaving behind the refined metal glowing brilliantly within the cauldron. The 4 oars were extremely rare commodities in the world, each of them worth a fortune. Probably, only in a place like Firesource City could one take out all 4 of them so easily. Through skillfully maneuvering his zhengqi, Zhong Xian slowly pushed the 4 oars together, fusing them. As he did so, he turned to the middle-aged man with a slight smile on his face and said, "The easiest segment in smithing a weapon is the forging one phase. This phase happens to be the most time-consuming as well, so I will just skip that." As he spoke, Zhong Xian gathered zhengqi at the tips of his finger and abruptly shot it into the searing earth flames. The freshly fused alloy flew out of the cauldron and into a quenched 2 bath not too far away. Tzzzzzzzzzz. Smoke puffed into the air. Shortly after, Zhong Xian raised his hand and grasped. A huge lump of metal appeared before his eyes. This is a weapon. Looking at the metal lump, the middle-aged man's lips twitched uncontrollably. Putting aside mere apprentices, even a pig could probably forge something way better than that. With a bizarre look on his face, the middle-aged man casually took the weapon, intrigued by the monstrosity that the other party had smithed. The next moment, however, his eyes narrowed in astonishment. His proficiency in smithing wasn't too high, but having pursued a 6-star blacksmith for more than 20 years, he still possessed a decent eye for weapons. As ugly and revolting as the metal lump looked, there was no doubt that it was a spirit pinnacle weapon. To casually pick up a few oars and forge a spirit pinnacle weapon within less than a minute. What kind of frightening ability was this? If he could smith such a powerful weapon without paying any heed to the meticulous details, once he got serious, what kind of formidable weapons would he be able to smith? I apologize for doubting you. The middle-aged man hurried forward and kneeled onto the floor. At this moment, he felt nothing but awe and respect for the other party. Zhong Xian nodded. Even though he was a real 6-star pinnacle blacksmith through and through, his ability was limited to only refining the ores and quenching. As for the most basic forging, it was regrettable, but he knew nothing about it at all. As a result, all he could forge at the moment were metal lumps. Anything more complicated than that was beyond his capability. Nevertheless, that was more than sufficient for him to gain the other party's trust. Seeing that he had won the other party's unreserved trust, Zhong Xian said, "All right. Now that I have verified my identity to you, you should be willing to listen to my instructions now, right? If it works out, not only will you become a full-fledged blacksmith, the facade of a certain hypocrite will be unmasked as well. The facade of a certain hypocrite will be unmasked." The middle-aged man couldn't comprehend the nuance of these words. Indeed. Zhong Xian nodded. May I know where the blacksmith's son Jin you spoke of is the moment? He should be at the blacksmith guild, the middle-aged man replied. Bring me to him. Later on, regardless of what I say or do, I want you to remain silent by the side. Don't interject, and act only on my command, Zhong Xian instructed. As the principal of a Master Teacher Academy, he couldn't allow poisonous chumas like Sun Jin to continue their tyranny. He had to expose the other party's misdeeds publicly, or else who knew how many more people would end up in the same pitiful plight as the middle-aged man before him. On top of protecting humanity, Master teachers had the duty to protect the sanctity of teaching. The solemnity of lineages mustn't be undermined by a couple of black sheep in society. Yes. The middle-aged man nodded. Just as the other party had said, as a person who was already prepared to die, what else did he have to fear? Perhaps, just perhaps, if the young man before him really could bring a miracle to him and resolve his problem, he could finally be freed from the abyss of despair that he had been gradually sinking deeper and deeper into over the years. Just as Zhongxian was about to walk out of the room, he suddenly halted and pointed toward the violet gilt metal on the rack. "Bring this or with us. We will use it later." The middle-aged man nodded and stowed it in his storage ring before leading the way to the blacksmith guild. With the blacksmith guild located just 3 streets away, it didn't take the duo too long to arrive at their destination. Darkness had already set upon the sky of Firesource City, but as the base of operations for the most popular occupation in the city, the blacksmith guild was still brightly lit, and huge crowds walked in and out of its entrance. Chapter 1022. Causing trouble. When they reached the guild's entrance, the middle-aged man fell silent for a brief moment before saying, "Sun Jin Laroche is one of the most capable blacksmiths in the guild, and he has many disciples and followers. As a mere apprentice, an evicted one at that, I have no right to bring you to him." Due to the rich earth flames around Firesource City, blacksmiths and apothecaries were particularly respected in the region. In a sense, they could be considered nobles there, existences whom the average civilians could never hope to make an appointment with. This was especially so for a blacksmith of Sun Jin's caliber. "You have no right. Don't worry, I will bring you right to him." Harumphing coldly, Zhongxian swiftly uncovered Sun Jin's location before leading the way over. The Firesource City Blacksmith Guild was bustling. The main hall was packed with sellers and buyers of weapons alike. 1-star and 2-star blacksmiths were serving as attendants in the area, attending to the customers and bringing about order to the crowd. After walking for a while, they soon arrived before a relatively vast room. Just as they were about to make their way in, 2 4-star blacksmiths walked up to them, and upon recognizing the middle-aged man following behind Zhongxian, they sneered coldly. "I was just wondering who this is. Isn't this our great Song Zhan, who still remains as an apprentice even after 20 long years? What? Are you unwilling to give up, so you wish to give it another try? It doesn't matter. No matter how many times you take the examination, trash is trash. You can't change your nature regardless of how much you try." Disdainful smiles were plastered on the faces of the duo. Clearly, they were well aware of the affairs surrounding the middle-aged man. "I." Hearing the sneers, the face of the middle-aged man, Song Zhan, paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but eventually, he closed it without saying a word. "All right, you should stop making a fool out of yourself here and scram. Our teacher has no intention of meeting you, so it doesn't matter how many times you come here." One of the 2 4-star blacksmiths waved his hands impatiently. Song Zhan was about to explain the situation when Zhongxian suddenly raised his hand, stopping him. After which, Zhongxian turned his gaze toward the duo and said, "He isn't the one who wants to meet your teacher, it's me. Get Sun Jin out here to receive me." "You want our teacher to receive you? Who do you think you are?" Hearing the arrogant words spoken by the young man before him, one of the 4-star blacksmiths guarding the door harumphed coldly, the disdain in his eyes reflected clearly for all to see. Given his teacher's standing, even the city lord of Firesource City had to submit a visiting scroll in advance before paying a visit. Yet, this 20-year-old fellow actually dared to speak such haughty words, wanting his teacher to receive him. The ignorant sure were fearless. "I will give you 3 counts to get out of my way, or else I will toss you out myself," the other blacksmith threatened menacingly. Seeing that the duo wasn't planning on letting him enter, Zhongxian shook his head and said, "Since he has no intentions on receiving me, it seems like I will just have to go in by myself." Right after saying those words, Zhongxian turned his eyes away from the duo and began making his way into the room. As the principal of the Master Teacher Academy, not even a 7-star master teacher would dare to keep him waiting outside. Seeing that the young man was trying to barge in forcefully, the faces of the 2 4-star blacksmiths warped in astonishment. "Audacious! What are you trying to do?" They hurried forward to block the young man's path as they raised their palm, prepared to make a move. However, before they could launch their strike, an overwhelming might crashed down upon them. Peng peng. The duo was knocked flying simultaneously before crashing heavily into the wall. Their faces reddened, and fresh blood spewed from their mouths. With just a look, Zhongxian could tell that this wasn't the first time that the two four-star blacksmiths had oppressed others. Toward such people, he had no intention on holding back at all. With a simple exertion of his zhenqi, the duo was already severely wounded. The two of them were only at Cosmos Bridge Realm, so it was only natural that they wouldn't even be able to withstand a simple exertion of zhenqi from Zhongxian. Struggling to his feet, one of the four-star blacksmiths exclaimed, "Someone is trying to barge in forcefully." His voice was very loud, and it swiftly resounded through the main hall of the blacksmith guild. "Someone is trying to barge in? What is going on?" Countless pairs of eyes turned toward them. However, Zhongxian paid those curious gazes no heed at all, proceeding in with an impassive look on his face. Song Zhan had thought that the other party was paying a visit to the blacksmith guild to find a solution to his problem, but who could have known that the other party would forcefully barge in such a manner? Horrified, he couldn't help but cower in fear. However, after a moment of hesitation, he clenched his jaws in determination and decided to follow behind the other party. No matter what, it was apparent that the other party was doing it for him, so how could he back away at this moment? On the other hand, noting that Song Zhan had decided to follow behind him, Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. Even though he was determined on bringing judgment upon Sun Jin today, it could pose some trouble to him should Song Zhan choose to back down at this crucial moment. "Trying to barge into our blacksmith guild? You are seeking death. Quick, stop that fellow." Hearing the shouting from the four-star blacksmith, 7 middle-aged men within the room hurried forward to surround Zhongxian. Dressed in their blacksmith robes, there were either 4 or 5 gleaming stars on the emblems pinned in front of their chests, indicating their ranks. Without any hesitation, they drew their weapons and launched an assault at the two intruders. As the occupation that was second only to master teachers in Firesource City, blacksmiths had their pride and dignity to uphold. Any action that undermined the prestige of the blacksmith guild had to be dealt with sternly to show others that blacksmiths weren't to be trifled with. Thus, upon hearing that someone was forcefully barging into the blacksmith guild, their first thought was to apprehend the other party before anything else. Seeing the 7 middle-aged man assaulting him without any hesitation, Zhongxian sneered coldly, "Noisy." Without even shooting them a glance, Zhongxian placed his hands behind his back and continued walking forward. Peng 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 peng. The crowd who had rushed forward to attack him were all knocked back. The stronger the attack was, the more forceful the counterattack against them was. Under the immense impact, their faces paled, and blood spurted from their mouths. As 5-star blacksmiths, their cultivation had already reached transcendent mortal 8 Dan or 9 Dan. Yet, despite their strength, they had still been sent flying just like that, as if saying that they weren't even qualified to be considered an opponent to Zhongxian. Seeing the entire sight from behind, Song Zhan's face paled in astonishment, and his body began trembling. Back when the other party flicked away the sword in his hand, he had already known that the other party was a powerful expert. However, he didn't think that the other party would be so fearsome. The strongest expert he had met ever since he was young was the guild leader of the blacksmith guild. Yet, to his shock, he realized that the young man before him seemed to be even stronger than the guild leader of the blacksmith guild. "Quick, someone is trying to barge in." Hualala. Right after the 7 of them fell to the ground, another group of men rushed in. They were all 5-star blacksmiths as well, and as soon as they entered the room, they immediately launched a torrent of attacks toward Zhongxian. However, just like before, the attacks were completely ineffective. A moment later, they were left lying on the ground as well. After striking down 3 waves of guards, the duo finally arrived at the lounge. "Song Zhan, what do you mean by this?" Right after stepping into the lounge, they saw an old man glancing over in their direction with fury blazing in his eyes. There were 2 6-star blacksmiths standing beside the old man. "Aye." Upon seeing the old man, Song Zhan's face paled. As if the other party's authority had been marked deep into his bones, he found himself unable to speak a word at all. We don't mean anything much, we are just here to ask if you manage to sleep well at night. You filled your apprentices with hope, only to usher them toward despair. Don't you feel the slightest guilt within you? Zhongxian walked straight toward the main seat in the lounge before turning a heavy gaze toward the old man. The old man's cheeks twitched slightly, and with a face livid with rage, he bellowed, "Who are you? This is the Blacksmith Guild, not a place where you can fool around." Fool around? Zhongxian shook his head with a wry smile before turning a sharp gaze toward the old man. "I am here to return justice to Songjun." One of the 6-star blacksmiths standing beside the old man stepped forward and sneered coldly. "Return justice to Songjun? What justice does he need? Despite studying under Sun Jin Laosha for more than 20 years, he hasn't even managed to clear his 1-star blacksmith examination yet. What justice does that trash need? It's only because of Sun Jin Laosha's magnanimity that he was allowed to remain here for so long. Otherwise, the Blacksmith Guild would have long chased scum like him out of its doors." The 6-star blacksmith seemed to be in his early 40s, and he possessed a cultivation of nascent saint as well. The gaze that he directed toward Songjun was filled with mockery and disgust. "I am talking to Sun Jin. Who do you think you are to interject in our conversation?" Zhongxian's face darkened. "Kneel down, catcher." All of a sudden, the 6-star blacksmith felt an immense might crushing down on him. Without any time to react at all, his knees caved him, leaving him kneeling helplessly on the ground. "How dare you cause trouble here? Who in the world gave you the guts to do so?" Seeing his companion being forced to kneel on the ground, the other 6-star blacksmith flew into a rage. Bellowing furiously, he whipped out a sword and charged right toward Zhongxian. As the sword pierced through the air, a freezing gust of wind seemed to permeate the entire room. Even though the 6-star blacksmith only possessed a cultivation of Saint Wundan primary stage, the sword in his hand had reached the level of Spirit Pinnacle. Through the augmentation of his sword, even a Saint Wundan intermediate cultivator would find it hard to stand against him. Facing the other party's ferocious assault, Zhongxian flicked his finger casually, and the sword immediately flew out of the other party's hand. In the next moment, the sword flew into his hands, and with a resounding ding, the sword had acknowledged its new master. Pu. Seeing his personal weapon taking another man as its master, the face of the 6-star blacksmith turned ghastly pale, as if he had seen a ghost. Stifled by the sight he had just seen, a huge mouthful of blood spurted from his mouth. "Who in the world are you?" Seeing how the young man was able to incapacitate one of his students with a word and have a Spirit Pinnacle weapon acknowledge him as its master with a flick of his finger, Sun Jin's face finally turned grave. "Like I said, I am here to return justice for Songjun." Zhongxian turned his cold gaze toward Sun Jin. "Do I really need to point it out explicitly to you? I have taught Songjun for more than 20 years, and yet, he still wasn't able to become a 1-star blacksmith. What business is it of mine that his talent is mediocre?" Sun Jin spat through gritted teeth. "You are saying that it has nothing to do with you?" Picking his ear leisurely, a look of disappointment surfaced on Zhongxian's face. "I don't like to hear those words. Tell me the truth." "You." Seeing that the other party wasn't about to let the matter rest easily, veins began popping out of Sun Jin's temper. With a frown of displeasure, he harumphed. "What I said is the truth. There is nothing I can do about his lack of talent. If you don't believe me, you can ask Songjun about the matter yourself. A person who can't even smith a mortal tier weapon, what can I possibly do to help him? It seems like speaking the truth is something very difficult for you. Since that's the case, why don't I share something with you? Perhaps it might help you jot your memory." Gazing deeply at Sun Jin, Zhongxian said calmly, "The cultivation technique he practices is suited for finding ores, but it happens to be in conflict with earth flames, thus making it impossible for him to smith. Can you tell me what is going on here?" "This." Sun Jin was astonished to hear those words, but he didn't allow it to show on his face. Nevertheless, his fists couldn't help but clench tightly behind his back. "He is just an ordinary apprentice. How would I know what kind of cultivation technique he practices? Do you expect a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith like me to bother myself with even the cultivation technique of a mere apprentice?" "You." Those words seemed to have triggered an explosion in Song Zhen's face. With a face scarlet with agitation, he exclaimed, "But you were the one who imparted my cultivation technique to me. You even offered me many pointers so as to ensure that I wouldn't err. How can you possibly be unaware of it?" Chapter 1023. Twisted. The cultivation technique that he practiced had been personally taught to him by Sun Jin. Every time he met with a problem in his cultivation, Sun Jin would always step in personally to guide him. This was also the reason he was extremely grateful to the other party, and he felt deeply guilty that he had brought shame to the other party's name. That was also one of the major contributing reasons he had eventually decided to end his life. Yet, why was the other party denying it now? Nonsense. Sun Jin flung his sleeves and harumphed coldly. "You aren't my direct disciple or even my student, you are just a mere apprentice. Who do you think you are for me to impart a cultivation technique to you and even personally guide you along?" Song Zhen's body shook in disbelief. He wanted to scream that what he had said was the truth and that he wasn't lying. Yet, he wasn't able to find any way to refute the other party's words at all. Back then, when he first learnt that cultivation technique, the other party had told him that it was a very formidable technique and that others might attempt to lay their hands on it should they learn of its existence. As such, he had hidden the nature of his cultivation technique very well for the past 24 years. Who could have known that it was a trap laid by the other party from the very start? At this point, there was no way he could explain it anymore. After all, given his identity, it was indeed irrational to think that a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith would devote time to guiding him personally. "I have taught you for more than 20 years, and this is how you return my kindness? To actually bring someone over to injure my disciples? Song Zhen, I must have been blind to have taken you in back then." Sun Jin bellowed furiously. "You are going overboard with your acting." Seeing how the other party's disposition was growing stronger and stronger with each word spoken, as if he was the one who had the moral high ground, Zhongxian tapped his finger on the table beside him impatiently. "Since you are unwilling to speak the truth, I guess I'll just have to find some other way to get it out of you." After saying that, Zhongxian flicked his finger. Pang! As if struck by a sudden streak of lightning, Sun Jin's figure retreated swiftly into the distance before coughing violently on the ground, and fresh blood spouted from his mouth. "You!" Not expecting the other party to make a move against him, overpowering him with a mere strike of his finger, Sun Jin's body trembled in disbelief. Arrogant. The other party was too arrogant. This was the blacksmith guild they were in. To barge in and attack him fearlessly, did the other party think that the blacksmith guild was just for show? Wiping his finger on his sleeve, as if disgusted by how dirty it was, Zhongxian gazed down coldly upon the fallen Sun Jin. "How about it now? Do you recall anything yet?" "You!" Sun Jin clenched his jaws tightly as his face flushed crimson. Knowing that he couldn't admit to the matter at any cost, he bellowed back, "All that I have said is the truth." "The truth?" "That's right. He's just a mere apprentice, a person who hasn't even qualified as a 1-star blacksmith yet. How can he be qualified to have me lie for him?" At this point, a look of savagery surfaced in Sun Jin's eyes as he roared, "And you, regardless of who you are, to dare to act so arrogantly in the blacksmith guild, I have to say, you are a goner." Had Zhongxian not known about Song Zhen's affairs in advance, he might very well have fallen for Sun Jin's act. However, having learned of the atrocities that Sun Jin had committed over the years, he didn't have the slightest shred of pity for the other party. Shaking his head in disappointment, he said, "It seems like you are unwilling to speak after all." To be honest, Sun Jin was indeed a very crafty person. Knowing that he would be severely punished if he were to be caught misguiding his apprentice, he had prepared in advance so as to absolve himself of any blame. As long as he refused to admit that he had taught Song Zhen his cultivation technique, there was no one who would be able to do anything to him. After all, the previous batch of apprentices whom he had imparted the cultivation technique to had nearly died out. There was nothing that the other party could possibly find to utilize against him. But while such a mean might be effective in fooling others, there was no way it would work on Zhongxian. If he really wanted the other party to speak, he could easily find several dozen methods to do so. The only reason he hadn't done so was give the other party an opportunity. What I am saying is the truth, Sun Jin insisted adamantly, but before he could finish his words, he felt another aching sensation at his chest, and he was sent flying once more. The injuries he had sustained this time around was even more severe. It felt as if something had mashed his internal organs together. He lay weakly on the ground, unable to get back up. How is it? You still can't remember? Zhong Xian asked. It will make no difference even if you kill me. If you dare kill me, you will definitely be chased to the end of the world by the Blacksmith Guild, Sun Jin roared angrily. He knew deeply that he couldn't admit to it. The moment that he did so, he could very well be sentenced to death by the guild. On the other hand, if he were to deny it vehemently, there would be nothing the other party could do, having no evidence on hand. Since you desire to die, allow me to grant your wish. Zhong Xian flicked his finger once more, and a surge of sword chi flew towards Sun Jin. Hold it right there. At this instant, a loud bellow sounded, and 3 white-bearded elders entered the room. Upon seeing the surge of sword chi, they hurriedly rushed forward to deflect it. Dressed in conventional blacksmith robes, there was an emblem with 6 gleaming stars pinned on the chests of each of the 3 elders. With the 3 of them making a move simultaneously, a powerful might reminiscent of the relentless currents of a river burst forth. Boom! The 2 forces collided, cancelling one another out. The eyebrows of one of the elders shot up, and a powerful air of authority exuded from him. Stepping forward, he glared at Zhong Xian with wrathful eyes. This friend over here, to barge in here and severely wound one of my elders, are you belittling us, or does the Blacksmith Guild mean nothing to you? Upon seeing the elder, Songjin hurriedly sent a telepathic message to Zhong Xian. He is Guild Leader Zhong. Guild Leader Zhong. Yuan, Guild Leader Zhong Mingchun. He is a Saint 1 Dan Pinnacle expert, as well as a 6-star Pinnacle blacksmith. His strength is even superior to the head of the Master Teacher Pavilion, and it is no joke to say that he is the strongest expert of our Fire Source City, Songjin explained anxiously. Due to its unique geographical terrain, the Blacksmith Guild and Apothecary Guild had developed to become far more prosperous and stronger than the other occupations. As a result, the head of the Blacksmith Guild was even stronger than the head of the Master Teacher Pavilion. Now that an expert of Guild Leader Zhong's caliber had gotten involved in this matter as well, how were they to resolve this issue? Before Zhong Xian could say a word, Sun Jin had already climbed to his feet and exclaimed furiously, Guild Leader Zhong, save me. He actually dared to make a move against me. This is completely preposterous. He does not care about the law at all. A person like him must be killed, and his corpse must be incinerated with the earth flames so as to serve as a warning to others. I am a blacksmith myself, so naturally, I have no thoughts of belittling the Blacksmith Guild. Paying no heed to Sun Jin, Zhong Xian flicked his wrist and took out his 6-star blacksmith emblem. You are a 6-star blacksmith? Upon seeing the emblem, Guild Leader Zhong frowned. A moment later, he spoke with a grim voice. Even if you are a 6-star blacksmith, any grudges you have with Sun Jin should be resolved through the headquarters. If you had applied for a life-and-death duel beforehand, there would have been nothing that we could have said about the situation. However, to barge into our guild and harm one of our men, there is no way you are getting out of here alive today. Set up the formation. Right after saying those words, Guild Leader Zhong waved his hand. Hualala. The 2 elders beside him immediately rushed into their positions, forming a unique formation around Zhong Xian. I have already told you my identity. As the guild leader, instead of investigating the situation, you chose to set up a formation to deal with me instead. Don't you think that you are being a little too hasty here? He had already revealed his identity as a 6-star blacksmith, and yet, the other party still unhesitatingly chose to make a move against him. After all of the talk about rules and order, the other party was still siding with his own men. Take down that insolent fellow first before we talk about the matter. Ignoring Zhong Xian's words, Guild Leader Zhong bellowed furiously before raising his palm and charging forward. Hong Long. As Guild Leader Zhong made his move, the other 2 elders also raised their palms. The 3 surges of Zhunqi formed a unique formation that shrouded the entire lounge. Under the effects of the formation, the 3 of them could transmit their powers to one another freely, allowing them to practically double the strength of an individual among them in an instant. Guild leader Zhong might only have been at Saint Wondan pinnacle a moment ago, but with the other two elders infusing their strength into him, he had gained the power to face even a Saint Tu Dan primary stage cultivator face-on. Taking a glance at the formation, Zhong Xian shook his head. 3 stars Violet Moon formation? As a 6-star pinnacle formation master, he saw through the other party's seemingly profound formation with a single glance. The 3 stars Violet Moon formation had been created by a Saint Realm formation master 2,000 years ago. Requiring 3 men for it, the formation served to create a remote connection between the trio, allowing them to put their strength together and exert a might far greater than a normal collaboration among them. For guild leader Zhong and the 2 elders to go all out and utilize such a formation right from the start, they must have felt threatened by his strength. If you know of the formation, you would do well to raise your hands and surrender peacefully. Perhaps, I can consider sparing you this once. Otherwise, today shall be the day of your death. Zhenqi rumbled in guild leader Zhong's palm, threatening to burst forth at any moment. Day of my death. Zhong Xian shook his head, his face reflecting the deep disappointment he had in the other party. Despite serving as the guild leader, you are unaware of the atrocities committed by your own subordinate, allowing him to bring harm upon many budding blacksmiths. Not only so, you jump swiftly to conclusions, choosing to turn against me to protect your own subordinate without investigating the matter. It seems like it's about time to clean up the Fire Source City Blacksmith Guild. Even if guild leader Zhong wasn't able to see through the anomaly in Song Jin's cultivation technique in a glance like Zhong Xian had, he should have at least noticed or heard something about the huge reserve of ores that Sun Jin had amassed over the years. That should have been enough to send warning bells ringing in guild leader Zhong's mind to investigate the matter. Regardless of whether guild leader Zhong was intentionally covering for Song Jin or hadn't noticed it in the first place, there was one thing that was certain: he had seriously failed in his responsibilities as a guild leader, and he had to be punished for that. We can talk about that once you survive our attack. On the other hand, seeing how the other party was uttering such big words even when death was imminent for him, guild leader Zhong harumphed coldly. Stepping forward, a powerful aura reminiscent of an imposing dragon burst forth from him, and a huge congregation of energy exploded out. Boom! That huge congregation of energy swiftly warped into a massive sword as it bolted toward Zhong Xian with unbelievable speed. Song Jin's face paled in fright, and he exclaimed anxiously, "Be careful." The might gathered within the massive sword felt so great that it seemed as if it could even split the world in two. Not even a Saint Tu Dan expert could possibly stand against such immense force. It was for his sake that the other party had come here. If the other party were to be killed because of him, he would feel guilt-ridden for life. Clenching his jaws in determination, Song Jin was just about to charge forward to take the attack in Zhong Xian's stead when the other party abruptly grabbed the teacup on the table beside him and poured its contents forward. Wang! The next instant, the massive sword of Zhenqi abruptly swerved upward. Boom! The sword tore through the roof, leaving debris and dust scattering all around the lounge. He actually deflected that attack with a single cup of tea? This. Unable to believe his eyes, Song Jin rubbed his eyes forcefully, seemingly trying to check if he was dreaming. The trio had brought out the might of the 3 stars Violet Moon formation perfectly, such that even Saint Tu Dan experts would have had no choice but to flee before that overwhelming strength. Yet, that fellow had actually deflected that powerful attack with just a cup of tea. Just how in the world did he manage to do it? As much as Song Jin was astonished, guild leader Zhong and the others were flabbergasted by the ludicrous sight before them as well. To redirect the might of their formation with just a cup of tea, that was something that had exceeded the scope of their imagination. Inconceivable. There is something bizarre about that fellow. Let's use our strongest move. Guild leader Zhong roared furiously. In the next instant, the 3 elders drew their swords. 3 chilling gleams flashed through the air, heading right for Zhong Xian. This is bad. Upon seeing guild leader Zhong and the other 2 elders drawing their swords, Song Jin's face turned as pale as a sheet of paper. It was apparent that guild leader Zhong and the others were enraged, and they were planning to kill Zhong Xian. He hurriedly turned his gaze toward Zhong Xian anxiously, only to see the latter frowning in displeasure. "Are you done yet?" After saying those words, he stood up and lifted the chair beneath him with a single hand before walking forward with widened strides. "A chair." Seeing Zhong Xian's actions, Song Zhen nearly spurted a mouthful of blood. "Of your 3 opponents, 2 are wielding spirit pinnacle swords and the last one has a half-saint sword in hand. Yet, you are going to face them with just a chair. Do you think that this is a street fight? How in the world do you expect to win with such a weapon in hand?" Chapter 1024. You are Principal Zhong? Not only was Song Zhen frenzied by the sight before him, the mouths of guild leader Zhong and the others were also twitching uncontrollably, and they felt as if their minds were about to blow at that sight. It was indeed true that the chairs of their blacksmith guild were extremely expensive commodities, made out of superior materials, but even so, it was still just wood. Perhaps it might have been a decent weapon in a street fight against ordinary humans, but to use it to deal with their 3 stars violet moon formation was a blatant insult to them. Gritting his teeth tightly, guild leader Zhong harumphed coldly. "Since you are courting death, don't blame us when you get hurt." Flicking his wrist forcefully, a sword chi reminiscent of a relentless waterfall flowed forth. Voila! In the blink of an eye, guild leader Zhong had already executed his strongest sword art. Half-saint battle technique. Knots of 1,000 threads. As if 2 interweaved webs, 1,000 knots there are in my heart. This battle technique was created by a lovesick sword master 1,000 years ago. The main aim of the sword chi lay not in killing but coiling. Once struck by this technique, one would feel as if one had fallen into a marsh, unable to struggle free. With guild leader Zhong's current strength, complemented by the effects of the formation, not even a Saint 2 Dan intermediate stage cultivator would be able to deal with it easily. It seemed like he was aware that ordinary means wouldn't be effective on the other party, considering the other party's extraordinary strength and deep comprehension of formations. As such, he had decided to use his strongest means in the hope of taking down the other party swiftly. Hula. The sword chi swiftly formed circle after circle. Once trapped within, even the most formidable of experts would have to suffer a fair bit to break free. Yet, the young man before him didn't seem to be aware of the danger ahead of him. Holding the leg of the chair, he continued proceeding forward fearlessly. "You came." Guild leader Zhong sneered. "Tzzzz." With a skillful flick of his sword, the sword chi instantaneously surrounded Zhong Xian. "I succeeded." Guild leader Zhong nearly leaped up in excitement. He had only intended to use this technique to harass the other party, hoping to uncover the full extent of the other party's strength through it. Yet, who knew that he would successfully coil his sword chi around the other party so easily? So far, he had never encountered a cultivator who could break free from his knots of 1,000 threads before. Delighted, guild leader Zhong had just started thinking about how he should deal with the other party when the person who should have been trapped within his knots of 1,000 threads abruptly vanished, causing his sword chi to end up coiling around nothing. The next moment, the other party abruptly appeared right before him, and the blunt, squarish edges of the wooden chair came crashing down forcefully on his head. "Aye!" Guild leader Zhong's body stiffened. Before he could make sense of what had just happened, a sharp pain abruptly assaulted his face. Peng 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 peng. Despite the weak material used to make the chair, it had been reinforced by the other party's zhenqi, making it as tough as steel. In the blink of an eye, his face was already completely soaked in blood. Wait a moment. The other 2 6-star blacksmiths who had been fighting alongside guild leader Zhong were also frenzied by the sight before them. They had gone to the extent of utilizing a collaborative formation along with their strongest attack, and yet, they had still ended up being pummeled by the other party. More importantly, it was one thing if the other party had wielded a powerful weapon, but he was only equipped with the chair he had been sitting down on a moment ago. Just the thought of the current situation left them feeling so stifled that they could spurt blood. It was not much of an issue that he had been pummeled by an expert, but if the other blacksmiths were to learn that their guild leader had been viciously pummeled by a person wielding with a chair, they would become the laughingstock of the entire Firesource city. As such, the 2 elders hurriedly charged forward to save their guild leader. The zhenqi in their bodies surged furiously as they drew out two white streams of silk-like sword qi. However, before their attack could land on the young man, the sight before them abruptly darkened. All of a sudden, they found a chair headed right toward their faces as well. Pilipala. Zhong Xian swung his arm relentlessly, bringing the chair down upon the trio before him. They sure were shameless. It was out of concern for their dignity that he had held himself back, but those three were so thick-skinned that they didn't know when they would stop. What formation, strongest attack, and sword art? Shouldn't they have realized that it was futile by now? Even a Saint Tu Dan combat master wasn't a match for him. What could three Saint Wundan fellows do? Putting aside setting up a formation, even if they were to bring their entire extended family over, they would still not have been a match for him. After 2 minutes of merciless pummeling, the three most esteemed blacksmiths in the guild were eventually left lying on the ground, bruised all over. This. Sun Jin was dumbfounded, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He had thought that, with the guild leader and the two elders making a move simultaneously, they would surely have been able to subdue the other party easily. Yet, never in his dreams did he expect to see the other party easily suppressing the trio with just a chair in hand. For a chair to actually overwhelm a half-saint weapon, just what was this? All right. After giving the guild leader and the two elders a harsh beating, Zhong Xian finally placed the chair down and sat down on it once more. Are you willing to listen to my words now? You. Who in the world are you? Not expecting a 20-year-old young man to actually possess such astounding prowess, guild leader Zhong clenched his jaws tightly and roared, barging into the blacksmith guild and beating up the guild leader and elders. I have already reported this matter to the head of the Master Teacher Pavilion. Be prepared to face the wrath of Pavilion Master Feng. The Master Teacher Pavilion was in charge of maintaining the security and order of the region it was stationed in. Regardless of the identity of the young man before him, his act of barging into the blacksmith guild and intentionally wounding its members had already infringed upon the rules of the Master Teacher Pavilion. The other party would have already gotten away by the time the personnel from the blacksmith guild headquarters arrived to deal with this matter. However, there was still the Fire Source City Master Teacher Pavilion located not too far away, and once they learned of the matter, they would surely rush over at top speed. While many had viewed him to be the strongest expert in Fire Source City, guild leader Zhong knew that that was far from the case. In terms of fighting prowess, there was no doubt that Pavilion Master Feng was above him. On top of that, for some reason, many experts had gathered in the regional Master Teacher Pavilion in recent days. Once they dispatched their forces, they would surely be able to apprehend that fellow and teach him a lesson that he would never forget. Pavilion Master Feng? You are talking about Feng Yihui? Zhong Xian asked with an ironic smile on his lips. That's right. Guild leader Zhong roared affirmatively. The head of the Fire Source City Master Teacher Pavilion, Feng Yihui, was his close friend, and they had known one another for more than 100 years now. As soon as he learned that someone had barged into the blacksmith guild, he had immediately sent a message to inform the other party. Judging from the amount of time that had passed, the other party was due to arrive very soon. All he could do now was pray for Pavilion Master Feng to arrive as soon as possible so as to back him up. However, at that moment, the young man before him abruptly turned his gaze outside and said, Pavilion Master Feng, you have been watching this commotion long enough. Isn't it about time you come in? Watching this commotion? Pavilion Master Feng has already arrived. Gedung. An ominous premonition struck guild leader Zhong's heart. He hurriedly turned his head and saw an old man walking over with an awkward look on his face. Zhongsha. Upon walking into the room, the old man bowed deeply to the young man first before turning his gaze toward him. Guild leader Zhong. This old man was the head of the Fire Source City Master Teacher Pavilion, Feng Yihui. Upon receiving his old friend's call for aid, he had immediately rushed over as soon as he could, fearing that the other party might have been in danger. However, when he arrived at the doorstep, he had realized that the so-called intruder was actually Principal Zhong, and he had immediately halted his footsteps. Principal Zhong was a 6-star master teacher like him, but as the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, his standing was a tier above his, comparable to 7-star master teachers. Naturally, he didn't have the right to question the other party's actions. As such, even when he saw guild leader Zhong being viciously pummeled by a chair, he had continued to hide outside, not daring to step in to intervene. However, he hadn't expected that Principal Zhong would actually notice his presence. With his presence exposed, he had no choice but to walk out awkwardly. Zhongshe. He is a master teacher. Noticing how respectful Pavilion Master Feng was when he greeted the other party, guild leader Zhong's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly turned his gaze toward the young man. Didn't the other party say that he was a 6-star blacksmith? Why did he become a master teacher all of a sudden? On top of that, for Pavilion Master Feng to treat the other party with such respect. Zhongshe. CC, could you be the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, Zhongxian? Guild leader Zhong's eyes widened in astonishment as realization struck him. He had no idea whether Principal Zhong was at Firesource City or not, but he was aware that there were 20,000 students from the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy who were in the midst of a mission there at the moment. Of the 20,000 students, 10,000 of them had blacksmith as their main supporting occupation, and they had just requested a substantial sum of smithing resources from them just 2 days ago, so naturally, he was aware of the matter. Considering that there were 20,000 students there, it wouldn't be a surprise if the principal was here as well. Indeed, I am Zhongxian. Zhongxian nodded. Principal Zhong? Song Zhen's body stiffened in disbelief when he heard those words, and soon after, his eyes turned fiery with agitation. It hadn't been long since Principal Zhong had been inaugurated as the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, but his name was already well known throughout the entire Hongyuan Empire. Even the citizens of a place as remote as Firesource City had all heard of his name. For such a legendary figure to say that it was possible for him to become a blacksmith. Perhaps, there just might be hope for him. Forming a stark contrast to Song Zhen's excitement was Sun Jin's look of horror. His eyes narrowed in disbelief as a feeling of weakness assaulted his entire body. If the other party had only been a blacksmith, he might just have been able to deny it to the very end. But if the other party was a master teacher, it was doubtful that his strategy would be able to work. The discerning eyes of the master teachers were not something that could be fathomed through common sense, and the master teacher pavilion possessed incredible means that would make it nigh impossible for anyone to lie to them. Not to mention, Zhongxian was the cream of the crop among the master teachers, a true legend. Guild leader Zhong's face had paled with fright, but after all that had happened, he was reluctant to give up. Even if you are the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, surely it is against the rules for you to barge into the blacksmith guild and assault our men. Even if the other party had a standing higher than his, to barge into their base and wound so many of their men, surely the Master Teacher Pavilion wouldn't condone such action. Rules. Harumphing coldly, Zhongxian rose from his seat. Commanding the authority and disposition of a principal, he said, "Only those who abide by the rules deserve to be protected by the rules. Only those who abide by the rules deserve to be protected by the rules." Guild leader Zhong was baffled by Zhongxian's words. When has our blacksmith guild broken the rules? Songzhen, come over. Zhongxian turned to the middle-aged man by the side and beckoned him over. Yes. Nodding, Songzhen hurried forward. Exert your zhenqi, Zhongxian instructed. Songzhen nodded before driving his zhenqi. The next moment, a heavy aura permeated the entire room. This type of zhenqi. Guild leader Zhong's eyes widened in bewilderment before they abruptly narrowed in realization. As a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, he could tell with a single glance what attribute the other party's zhenqi was and whether it complemented the earth flames or not. It was apparent that, with the middle-aged man's zhenqi, it was impossible for him to become a blacksmith. Seeing that guild leader Zhong understood what he was getting at, Zhongxian turned to Song Zhen and urged him on. Tell your story to guild leader Zhong over here. Yes. Song Zhen nodded. I was one of blacksmith Sun Jin's apprentices, and I have been learning smithing ever since I was 7. The cultivation technique that I am practicing has been taught by him. Without hiding anything, he repeated everything that he had told Zhongxian previously to guild leader Zhong. Even though he still wasn't too sure what was going on, he knew that Principal Zhong was doing all of it for him, and he trusted the other party as well. He imparted such a cultivation technique to you, And yet, he still urged you to take the blacksmith examination? How is this possible? Unless. Right after hearing Song Jian's words, guild leader Zhong's face turned completely pale. With a face as cold as the biting frost of a winter night, he turned to look at Sun Jin. Chapter 1025. Master Teachers Aren't to be Deceived. As a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, if guild leader Zhong still couldn't understand what was happening after hearing so much, he might as well just end his life then and there. However, while doubts had sprouted his heart, he still couldn't really believe that Sun Jin would commit such atrocities. Sun Jin was the elder he favored the most, and he had even intended to pass down his position as the guild leader to him. Why would the other party commit such foolishness? However, the truth was already laid clearly before him, and he had no choice but to face it. There was no way the principal of a master-teacher academy would barge into the blacksmith guild and cause such an uproar without investigating the matter properly. What is going on here? Gritting his teeth coldly, guild leader Zhong questioned the fellow in front of him. He really wanted to skin the other party alive at this moment. If this matter was indeed true, not only would Sun Jin be disgraced, the headquarters would also make an example out of the Fire Source City Blacksmith Guild to warn other blacksmiths from engaging in such immoral actions. As the guild leader, he would have to bear the criticisms from the public for his neglect of responsibility, perhaps even going down in historical records for his incompetence. Sun Jin's lips twitched uncontrollably as he tried to explain. Guild leader, I didn't do it. I really don't know what is going on. You don't know what is going on? A sharp glint flashed across guild leader Zhong's eyes. You should know full well the consequences of lying to a master teacher. Come clean now, and I might still be able to plead on your behalf. Otherwise, once your sins surface, I won't be able to say a word even if Principal Zhong has you executed at this very moment. Master teachers weren't to be deceived. If one were found lying to a master teacher in the midst of an investigation, their sins would engender far graver consequences. Not only would the person in question be executed on the spot, even their kin and students might be implicated, possibly being barred from joining any upper 9 paths occupations for their entire life. This wasn't the rule set by the master-teacher pavilion but a joint agreement made by the various occupations. This was something they had decided upon out of respect for the master-teacher pavilion due to their contributions to the world. If one would deceive even the teachers, they had already lost their principles. A person who lived by no principles would only eventually become a disaster for society. Sun Jin's face paled, and his body began trembling non-stop. It went without saying that he was aware of such a rule as well, but there was a spark of hope in the depths of his heart. Perhaps, if he could drag things out and the other party was unable to find any concrete evidence of his wrongdoings, he might just be acquitted of his sins. Is there nothing that you want to say? Guild leader Zhong bellowed as the disappointment in his eyes deepened. From the moment that Sun Jin hesitated, the truth was already apparent to him. If Sun Jin had really done nothing of the sort, he would surely have fought hard for his innocence. There wouldn't have been a look of dilemma on his face. A slight gesture, but it spoke 1,000 words. Having come to the same conclusion as well, Pavilion Master Feng Yihue harumphed coldly by the side. Don't harbor hopes that the Master-Teacher Pavilion will let this matter pass just by dragging things out. Do you honestly think that the Master-Teacher Pavilion would be so incompetent as to be unable to uncover the truth of a matter as simple as this? He felt that this matter was a failure on his part as well. Such an atrocity had been committed in his area of jurisdiction, and yet, he was actually ignorant of it. In the end, it even required Principal Zhong, who had barely arrived a few days ago, to point the matter out and resolve it. Having his thoughts being voiced, Sun Jin's body froze in horror. His lips pursed tightly together in fear. Indeed, as long as the Master-Teacher Pavilion put its mind into it, there was nothing that it couldn't uncover. Many years might have passed after what he had done, but the family members of the 30 apprentices he had taken in back then were still around. He was only able to get away with it thus far due to the lack of attention on the humble apprentices in the Blacksmith Guild. However, if a thorough investigation were to be conducted, the Master-Teacher Pavilion would surely be able to find evidence of his wrongdoing. An apprentice failing the blacksmith examination for many years might be attributed to his lack of talent, but for it to happen to 30 apprentices, even a fool could tell that something was wrong with it. Moreover, gathering his junchi in his left hand, he discreetly reached out for the storage ring on his right hand, intending to forcefully destroy it. However, before he could succeed, a powerful surge of sword chi flashed across his eyes. Voila! The right hand's middle finger was severed from the major knuckle, and the storage ring fell to the ground as well. If I am not mistaken, the cultivation technique that he had imparted to Song Zhen is in here, Zhong Xian said coldly. I'll check it right now. Guild leader Zhong walked forward and picked up the storage ring on the ground. With a surge of junchi, he erased the soul imprint on the storage ring before immersing his consciousness into it. A moment later, a book suddenly materialized in his hand. Flipping it open, his face gradually grew darker and darker, to the point that it seemed as if he might just explode on the spot. With gritted teeth, he passed it over to Song Zhen by the side. Is this the cultivation technique that you practice? Song Zhen took the book and browsed through it. A few moments later, he nodded. That's right. This is the cultivation technique that he imparted to us back then. Holding the book tightly in his grasp, guild leader Zhong turned his gaze back upon Sun Jin. Is there anything else that you have to say for yourself? Knowing that he was done for, Sun Jin's knees fell onto the ground in despair. It might have been possible for him to argue his way out of this a moment ago, but with that cultivation technique manual coming to the surface, there was no way he could do so anymore. That was irrefutable evidence of his wrongdoing. Greed blinded my eyes. I thought that if I could find a way to procure the valuable ores lying all around Firesaw City, I would be able to accrue a huge fortune for myself. Even if I were to retire in the future, I will be able to enjoy a life of luxury. For your life of luxury, you cast aside your morals and harmed so many innocent young children. How dare you call yourself a blacksmith? How dare you call yourself a teacher? Guild leader Zhong roared vehemently. While blacksmiths weren't master teachers, they had their own heritage that they passed down from generation to generation as well. As such, teaching was something they viewed with solemnity and sanctity as well. Yet, the fellow before him had actually used nurturing the next generation as an excuse to commit grievous atrocities. This was going beyond the ethical bottom line of all blacksmith. With a tap of his finger, guild leader Zhong sealed Sun Jin's cultivation before turning to Zhong Xian and Feng Yihui, saying, Principal Zhong, Pavilion Master Feng, it is me putting my trust in the wrong person and failing to keep my subordinate in check that allowed for atrocities. I shall resign from my position as the leader of the Blacksmith Guild and spend the rest of my life compensating the families of the 30 deceased apprentices. As the leader of the Blacksmith Guild, it was a huge breach of responsibility of his that Sun Jin had been able to act as he pleased for more than 2 whole decades, harming not only Song Zhen but many more apprentices as well. Even though those apprentices had long passed away, they were bound to have kin and friends still living. To make up for his failure, he had decided to dedicate his entire life to making up for this mistake. You aren't the perpetrator, but you do have a heavy responsibility to play in this matter, Zhong Xian said with his hands behind his back. While the crime had not been committed by guild leader Zhong, it was a fact that he was the one who had failed to notice Sun Jin's misdeeds and granted him the authority of an elder. The greater power that Sun Jin wielded had made it even more difficult for anyone to stand up against him, thus emboldening him to harm even more people. For one, there was no way Sun Jin could have been able to hide the deaths of so many of his apprentices if not for the power granted to him. In this sense, guild leader Zhong wasn't free from blame either. I understand. It is a pity that there is nothing I can really do to make it up to them. After saying those words, guild leader Zhong shot a glance at Song Zhen and sighed wearily. Putting aside the deceased apprentices, even for the middle-aged man before him, there was nothing he could do that could salvage the damage done to him. The cultivation technique that the other party practiced was fundamentally at odds with the earth flames. Even as a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, there was nothing he could do that could change that. That might not necessarily be so. Noting guild leader Zhong's gestures, Zhong Xian could somewhat fathom a guess on what the other party was thinking about. Walking up to Song Zhen, he stretched out his hand and said, "Pass the book to me for a moment." "Yes." Nodding, Song Zhan respectfully passed the cultivation technique manual that had just been procured from Sun Jin's storage ring to Zhong Xian. Taking the book, Zhong Xian casually flipped through it before lowering his head contemplatively. A moment later, he took out a book and a brush and began writing swiftly. A few moments later, he had already written out a brand new cultivation technique. He passed it over to Song Zhan and said, "Cultivate according to the method written here." By this point, Song Zhan had already made sense of everything that had just happened. The gaze that he directed toward Sun Jin was devoid of the respect it had before, replaced with endless hostility. It was with a heart filled with hope that he had become the other party's apprentice. For more than 20 years, it was the hope that he harbored that drove him on, allowing him to persevere through even the toughest of times. However, the more hope one harbored, the greater the despair upon failure. When Song Zhan took the book from Zhong Xian's hands, his mind was completely blank. He was very grateful toward Principal Zhong for bringing him justice, but having the goal that he had spent his entire life striving for being deemed impossible all of a sudden had left him completely lost. He had no idea what he should do from there onward. "I have said that I will make you a blacksmith. I never renege on my promises." Zhong Xian chuckled softly. "Once you are done cultivating the cultivation technique I have written down, you will be ready to take the 5-star or even the 6-star blacksmith examination." 5-star? 6-star? Song Zhan was flabbergasted by what he was hearing. He dared not believe what Zhong Xian had said to be true. "That's right." Zhong Xian nodded with a smile. Song Zhan hurriedly flipped open the book in his hand. The faint aroma from the slightly damp ink and the elegant calligraphy, which seemed as if they would leap out from the pages at any moment, calmed his unsettled mind. It didn't take him too long to finish reading through the entire book. By the time he was done, his body had already gone completely still, unable to believe what he had just seen. The fact that he had attained the incredible strength of a transcendent mortal 9 Dan in his 30s without the guidance of a master teacher was testimony to the incredible talent he possessed in cultivation. Even though he had only swiftly browsed through the manual once, he could already imagine the frightening might one could potentially harness after mastering it. Not only would it resolve the conflict between the attribute of his Zhenqi and the earth flames, it would even bring his cultivation to greater height. Seeing the daze Song Zhan was in, Zhong Xian urged him on with a smile. "You should start cultivating now." "Yes." Without any hesitation, Song Zhan hurriedly sat onto the floor and began cultivating according to the method recorded on the book. After Song Zhan began cultivating, Zhong Xian turned his gaze toward guild leader Zhong and said, "I will need to trouble you to find 3 grade 6 pills for me. They are namely the bone reinforcing body tempering pill, Great Reversal Meridian Reconstruction Pill." As Song Zhan had practiced the cultivation technique from Sun Jin for more than 20 years now, it was no easy feat to alter his meridians and change the attribute of his Zhenqi. Just the cultivation technique that Zhong Xian had tailored for him wouldn't suffice to make him a blacksmith. It was necessary to complement the cultivation technique with some pills as well. Reconstructing the meridians to change the attribute of a Zhenqi that was at odds with the earth flames previously to complement it instead was a feat that would have been impossible for anyone else to pull off. Only he, who cultivated the perfect Heaven's Path divine art, was capable of calculating a method that could resolve the issue. These pills might have been difficult to find anywhere else, but they aren't too uncommon in Fire Source City. "I will get it done right now," guild leader Zhong said before rushing off. A city built on a land rich in earth flames, blacksmiths and apothecaries there possessed an inherent advantage given the nature of their craft, thus making them the most popular occupations in Fire Source City. Furthermore, there were many precious medicinal herbs in the area. So, pills that would have been difficult to find anywhere else could easily be found within this city. It didn't take too long for guild leader Zhong to return with the 3 pills Zhong Xian spoke of. Zhong Xian passed the 3 pills to Song Zhan and gave him specific instructions on when he should consume them while cultivating. An hour later, a resounding buzz suddenly sounded from Song Zhan's body, and his aura abruptly surged. Within this short period of time, not only did he manage to change the attribute of his Zhenqi, he had even succeeded in achieving a breakthrough to half-saint. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.